Hello, friends. Welcome back to another quiet, heavy, atmospheric journey into the forgotten corners of history. Tonight, I invite you to settle in, take a deep breath, and let the fog of Victorian London roll over you like a cold blanket. This is not the London of grand manners and glittering ballrooms. Tonight, you walk among the shadows, among those who slept on stone steps for warmth, who drifted between life and death with every breath. Tonight, you become one of the crawlers. A fog-drenched evening settles over Victorian London, thick and pale like damp wool pulled across the city's bones. Gas lamps flicker along narrow streets, their halos smeared into ghostly blurs by the mist. The air tastes of coal smoke and wet soot, stinging your throat every time you inhale. Rainwater trickles along the uneven cobblestones, mixing with horse dung and factory grime until it becomes a cold, filthy slurry that clings to your boots. The city doesn't sleep, not truly. But in this hour, its movement becomes slow, almost dreamlike, and the only figures still visible are the shapes huddled on the steps of workhouses and churches, bodies curled in tight, protective knots, arms wrapped around thin ribs, faces buried against stone. These are the crawlers. Crawlers were the poorest among the poor, the ones who had fallen past the point where charity could catch them, but not far enough to fall into the grave. They slept on steps because the stones, after a long day of absorbing weak winter sunlight, still held a memory of warmth. They sought doorways because they shielded them from the worst of the rain. It wasn't comfort. Comfort had no place in their world. It was survival. Barely. Their nights were a cruel blend of starvation, relentless cold, and the constant fear of being kicked awake by a constable or chased off by a shopkeeper who didn't want street refuse cluttering the entrance. Even sleep, when it came, was fragile, half-conscious, broken, and always under threat. And now, in this story, you are not watching them from afar. You are one of them. You feel the rain soaking through the threadbare fabric of your jacket, the cold creeping beneath your skin like 1,000 needles. Hunger twists through your stomach, sharp and relentless, as though your own body has turned against you. Your fingers are numb, trembling, and when you breathe, the air tastes like metal and ash. You pull your knees closer to your chest, trying to hold on to what little warmth your body can make. Around you, the city sighs, the distant clatter of a carriage wheel, the echo of drunken laughter, the scraping shuffle of another crawler searching for a place to collapse. Tonight, the story slows its pace to match your weakened heartbeat. It becomes a soft, fog-bound descent, an invitation to experience a single night in their life and understand deeply and quietly why you could never survive as they did. Their suffering becomes a whisper, drifting through the alleys and shadows of Victorian London, forming the lullaby of a forgotten class. Before we begin this journey, don't forget to like, share, comment on your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories continue, and it means more than you know. Now, let's step into the fog. The descent into poverty, as you begin to understand now while sitting here on the wet stone steps of a Victorian workhouse, was never a dramatic plunge or a sudden collapse, but rather an almost invisible unraveling that crept into your life so quietly and so steadily that you scarcely realized what was happening until everything familiar had already slipped through your fingers. It began in the same understated way misfortune always does in this city, soft as the coal dust settling on rooftops, subtle as the fog curling through alleyways, taking the shape of an illness that lingered too long, or the sudden death of the person who carried the fragile weight of your family's income, or perhaps the loss of a job you assumed would last forever, because you had shown up every day without complaint and believed that such loyalty meant something in a world where survival itself was treated as a privilege. You can still remember, with a kind of hollow clarity that aches in your chest, the first moment when the stability of your life began to tremble, although at the time you reassured yourself that it was nothing more than a temporary setback, something that would resolve itself in a week or two if fate allowed. Maybe it was a fever that burned through your strength faster than any doctor, none of whom you could afford, could restore it. Maybe it was an accident in the factory that left your hands stiff and unusable, rendering you unfit for employment in the eyes of the overseer. Or maybe it was simply one of those sudden economic tides that swept through neighborhoods, shuttering small shops, and pushing workers into the street with the cold announcement that the business could no longer sustain them. Whatever the beginning was, you hardly noticed its significance at the time, because you still had a small cushion of savings tucked away, coins you had counted slowly, treasured fiercely, and believed would protect you if the worst ever happened. But in Victorian London, the worst always happened, and it rarely cared about your preparations or your hopes. Rent was unyielding, food prices rose without warning, and even the simplest items, a loaf of coarse bread, a handful of coal, a threadbare second-hand coat, seemed to devour your savings faster than your mind could accept. Each week, you returned to your tiny room with fewer coins in your pocket, telling yourself that tomorrow you would find new work, tomorrow you would earn enough to catch up, tomorrow you would get back to where you once were. Tomorrow, however, never arrived. The city itself worked against you in ways you did not fully understand until it was far too late. London cared nothing for your exhaustion, nothing for the trembling in your hands as you searched for employment, nothing for the fact that you once were respectable and hardworking. If you lacked references, if your clothes hung loosely on your thinning frame, if your cheeks revealed the hollowness carved by hunger, employers looked through you as though you were already drifting toward the gutters, and shopkeepers treated you with suspicion even when you still had a few coins left to spend. You began knocking on doors, not with the confidence you once had, but with a shame that rubbed against your ribs like a stone, and each refusal chipped away at your sense of self until eventually, when you saw your reflection in a shop window, you barely recognized the weary, anxious figure staring back. Your descent continued in the same slow, inexorable fashion until the day came when you reached into your pocket and found nothing, no coins, no comfort, no cushion left to soften the fall. When the landlord appeared, demanding rent you could not pay, you felt something inside you tear, though you still clung to the belief that you could recover if you just pushed yourself harder. But the street does not care about your efforts, and neither do the constables, who watch you with the same distant disdain reserved for any person unlucky enough to be poor in a city that insists poverty is a personal failing. As hunger gnawed through your days and the cold hollowed out your nights, you drifted from one grim shelter to another, sleeping first in alleys, then beneath archways, and finally on the steps where other bodies already huddled in tight clusters, seeking whatever faint warmth the stone might hold after the sun's weak attempts to heat the city. You told yourself it was only for a night, only until you found a bit of work, only until morning brought a new chance. But mornings stopped bringing chances, and instead brought deeper hunger, sharper cold, and the slow realization that the city had already swallowed you whole. You had not chosen to become a crawler. No one ever did. But once the city began pushing you downward, the absence of social safety nets meant there was no rope to grab, no outstretched hand to hold you steady, no organization designed to keep you from falling off the edge. A single misfortune could begin the slide, but once you were on it, there was no returning, no climbing back towards stability. Victorian London did not lift its poor. It simply rearranged them, shifting them from factories to streets, from rented rooms to doorsteps, from identities to silence. And now, as you sit with your back pressed against cold stone, your clothes soaked, your stomach twisted with hunger, and your body trembling from exhaustion, you finally understand the truth you had resisted for so long, that poverty did not descend upon you like a thunderbolt, but seeped into your life like the fog, slowly tightening its grip until you could no longer tell where your fate ended and the city's indifference began. You did not fall suddenly. You sank gradually, breath by breath, choice by choice, moment by moment, until one day you opened your eyes and realized that you were no longer sinking at all. You had already reached the bottom. Why? The time you first find your way to the workhouse steps, the city has already taken just about everything it can take from you. And although you do not yet understand it in full, every trembling step you drag through the wet streets is leading you to a place that is not quite a home, not quite a refuge, but rather the last narrow ledge before the abyss completely swallows you. The rain has been falling for hours in a thin, relentless drizzle that never becomes dramatic enough to be noticed as a storm, yet manages to soak through every layer of fabric you own, and as you walk, you feel how each drop seems to carry with it a little more of your strength. as if the weather itself has decided that you should be rinsed out and emptied. You have already tried, earlier in the day, to find shelter wherever a human body might fit, and you have failed in the patient, humiliating way that people fail in this city. You lingered under a narrow overhang outside a closed shop until the owner came out, not with sympathy, but with a broom handle and harsh words that blurred into the hiss of the rain. You drifted toward a stable, led by the faint warmth of animal breath and straw, only to be chased away again because vagrants meant theft, filth, contagion. Every doorway that seemed welcoming at first glance turned cold and hostile once you stepped closer, and every shadow that might have hidden you instead hid something or someone more dangerous than the weather. Drunk men, angry boys, or simply other bodies already claiming that small patch of existence. It is in this state, soaked, exhausted, and moving only because the alternative is to collapse where you stand, that you see the steps for the first time. They rise out of the fog in blunt slabs of stone, worn smooth by countless feet and streaked dark where the rainwater runs down from the heavy doors above. Because everyone knows that these are the steps of the workhouse, a place which promises shelter only on terms that strip you of dignity, autonomy, and often your family as well. And yet you also know that for those who have fallen too far, even for the workhouse rules, the steps themselves have become a kind of bitter compromise, a surface that belongs to no one and everyone at once. From a distance, the steps blur into a single dark shape against the building's pale facade. But as you come closer, you begin to make out forms huddled along the edges, forms so still and quiet that at first your mind tries to insist they are only piles of rags or discarded bundles of cloth. Then one of them moves just a slight shift of a shoulder, a shiver followed by the dull, low sound of a cough that seems to scrape up from somewhere very deep. You realize that these are not bundles, not refuse, but people. And you realize something else at the same time, something more difficult to admit. You are not approaching them to help or to offer anything at all, but because you are becoming one of them. The stone under your feet feels different as you step onto the lowest stair. It is still cold, still wet, still ruthless, yet compared to the open street it holds a faint, lingering memory of the day's warmth, as if the building has quietly been absorbing whatever heat the weak sun could offer and is now giving it back in the most miserly way. You wouldn't call it comfort, not even in your imagination, but after hours of walking through water that seemed to seep into your bones, the difference between the open pavement and these sheltered steps feels almost like a kindness. The overhanging ledge of the building roof breaks the direct line of rain so that, while the wind still drives dampness in from the sides, you are no longer being pinned from above by the sky itself. You pause, not only because your legs have begun to tremble uncontrollably, but because there is a strange etiquette to be observed here, an unspoken arrangement even among those who exist at the ragged edge of survival. You cannot simply throw yourself down on top of anyone or wedge yourself in without a thought, because every inch of stone has already been mentally measured by the bodies that occupy it, and every scrap of space has been negotiated by those who came before you. There is a narrow gap near the side, a place where the doorframe juts out enough to create a small pocket of shadow, and you feel your eyes lock onto it with a hungry focus that has nothing to do with food. As you move toward that gap, you notice how close the other figures are to each other, how their bodies touch not from tenderness but necessity, shoulders pressing into shoulders, knees curled against backs, hands tucked under armpits or wedged between ribs, and the cold stone in a desperate attempt to trap whatever heat still lingers in flesh and cloth. They are layered there like human bricks, leaning into one another because they know the simple truth that the city itself will never admit. A single body loses heat quickly, but several bodies together may stand a chance of lasting the night. The smell that rises from them is a thick, tired mixture of damp wool, unwashed skin, stale breath, and the sour metallic tang of sickness that has been forced to linger without medicine or rest. One of the crawlers, a figure with a frayed shawl pulled up over their head, shifts enough to look at you, or at least in your direction, though the eyes are half hidden in shadow, and in that slow, heavy turning of the head, there is both suspicion and recognition. They see what you are, not in the moral sense that the city loves to preach about, but in the raw, pragmatic sense, the hollowed cheeks, the shaking hands, the clothes that wear you rather than the other way around, and in that moment, without a word exchanged, you are silently accepted into this bleak fraternity of the steps. No one welcomes you, because welcome implies a choice, and no one scolds you, because scolding implies that a different path was available. They simply make room, or at least the closest thing to room that exists here, which is a small adjustment of feet and knees and shoulders to allow you to press yourself down onto the stone. When you finally lower yourself to sit, the stone steals the breath from your lungs in an almost shocking way, because even though you expected it to be hard, you did not quite expect the way the cold seems to travel upward through your clothes, through your skin, and directly into your bones, as though the building itself is drawing heat out of you on purpose. The dampness that has soaked through your garments spreads out between your body and the step, creating a clammy layer that clings to you no matter how you shift or rearrange yourself. You try to tuck your feet under your legs, to pull your arms against your chest, to curl into a tighter and tighter ball, yet the stone finds a way to touch you everywhere, inflexible and indifferent. The others lean into you gradually, not with warmth in their hearts, but with a kind of mechanical understanding. The back of someone's shoulder comes to rest against your upper arm, the edge of someone's knee nudges against your hip, and though part of you flinches at the contact, another part recognizes that this is how a body survives a winter night in a city that has no intention of keeping you alive. You can feel the faint heat radiating from the people on either side of you. A heat that is not enough to bring comfort, yet remains just enough to remind you that you are not entirely alone, even if the companionship is only functional. The sound of breathing close by, rough and irregular, becomes the background rhythm of the night, mixing with the distant rumble of carriage wheels and the occasional shout from somewhere further down the street. As the minutes slip into something slower and heavier, you become aware of the strange paradox that defines the steps. They are, in some brutal way, safer than the streets while simultaneously being just as dangerous. Here, beneath the slight shelter of the workhouse door, you are less exposed to the direct assault of wind and rain, and you are less visible to those who might find entertainment in tormenting someone weaker than themselves. At the same time, you remain entirely vulnerable to the creeping cold that seeps through stone and linen alike, and you know that if you were to slip fully into sleep, into the deep, surrendered kind of sleep your body craves, you might never claw your way back out of it. Sleep, which once felt like a refuge, now feels like a gamble. You understand, with a clarity that makes your fingers tighten around your own elbows, that if exhaustion weighs too heavily on your eyelids and your muscles finally loosen, your breathing could slow just enough for the night to decide it has had enough of you. The cold does not kill with any dramatic flourish. It simply narrows your world, breath by shallow breath, until heart and lungs forget their work. The stone beneath you, which seemed momentarily like a grudging ally because it was slightly warmer than the open street, waits patiently for that forgetting because it has absorbed bodies before and knows how to hold them. You allow your head to bow forward, your chin resting against your chest as your eyes half close, not in full surrender but in a sort of uneasy truce. You will steal scraps of rest where you can, in short, jagged fragments, but you know you must never drift too far into the dark. Around you, the other crawlers do much the same. Some are already hovering in that thin boundary land between waking and dreaming, where the mind drifts but the body remains tense, ready to jerk awake at the sound of heavy boots on stone or the harsh command of a constable telling everyone to move along. You listen to the murmur of shifting bodies, to the suppressed coughs and low groans, and you realize that every person on these steps is fighting the same double battle against hunger and cold. Yes, but also against the treacherous pull of sleep that promises temporary escape while quietly testing the limits of flesh. Your clothes, which once might have seemed merely threadbare, now reveal themselves as almost useless in the face of this long, soaking chill. The fabric clings coldly to your skin, and every time a breeze finds its way under the edge of your coat, it feels as though a blade of ice is being drawn lightly along your spine. Your feet no longer hurt in sharp ways. Instead, they have fallen into a dull, heavy numbness that is somehow more unsettling as if your body has decided that the extremities are no longer worth the effort of keeping alive. You try to wiggle your toes inside your shoes to coax some feeling back into them, but the movement is sluggish, and the response you receive is faint and distant, like a sound heard from another room. Time, on the steps, does something peculiar. It stretches and curls in on itself, so that a few minutes can feel like an hour and an hour like an entire winter. Without a clock, without even the changing light of a warm room, you measure the passing of the night by the way your own body changes, the point at which shivering becomes constant, the moment when your stomach stops growling and settles into a quiet, aching emptiness, the slow progression of your thoughts, from sharp worries, where will you go tomorrow? How will you find food, into a soft, slow haze where even fear feels too heavy to lift. You become acutely aware that the steps are not just stone. They are a boundary line, a grim threshold between those who still have some sort of roof and those who no longer do. At some point, though you cannot say exactly when, you realize that you have stopped thinking of yourself as someone temporarily using the steps and have begun, unconsciously, to think of yourself as one of the crawlers. The shift is not announced with a dramatic revelation. It slips into you as quietly as the cold did, until the idea of leaving the steps in the morning to return to the life you once had feels not simply unlikely, but vaguely absurd. You know now why so many bodies lie packed here, why they cling to one another in silence, why they endure the numbness and the danger. Because, in a city that has turned its doors and windows against them, the faint heat of stone and the cramped warmth of other human bodies are the only options remaining. And as you sit there, spine pressed against the unforgiving wall, limbs slowly losing the sharpness of sensation, you begin to understand that arriving at the workhouse steps is not just a physical relocation, not just a change of address from room to street. It is a final, heavy acknowledgement that the world you knew has closed its doors behind you, and that survival from this point onward will not be about comfort, or progression, or improvement, but simply about enduring the long, merciless hours of the night without letting sleep, cold, or despair pull you silently down into the stone. The night settles around you like a wet, suffocating blanket. The streets are silent now, save for the occasional hiss of wind weaving through crooked chimneys and broken rooftops. You hug your coat tighter around your shoulders, but it is thin, threadbare, and soaked from the evening mist. Even indoors, the stone walls of your temporary refuge seem to absorb the cold and radiate it back to you, leaving a chill that gnaws at your bones. You press your hands together, fingertips numb and stiff, praying for a warmth that seems forever out of reach. The fire, if there is one, is more a tease than a comfort, a flickering glow that casts shadows but does little to stop the creeping frost. The cold is no mere inconvenience here. It is a predator, patient and cruel. You have seen it claim more than just your comfort. Crawlers, those who scuttle along alleyways and sleep in hidden corners, often arrive at dawn with fingers swollen and blackened, toes lost to the merciless bite of frostbite. The smell of scorched flesh lingers in the alleys where the unfortunate drag themselves after a night spent shivering. You can feel, even now, the faint tingling in your toes, a warning from your own body that the cold is testing you, probing for weakness. Every joint aches, as if the ice has worked its way inside, settling into your marrow and demanding tribute. Your breath forms clouds in the dim light, each exhale a visible testament to the struggle for warmth. You shiver, a trembling that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with survival. The floor beneath you, often bare wood or stone, radiates the night's chill into your body, and every moment spent sitting or lying down feels like a negotiation with frost itself. Sleep is a perilous thing. If you allow your body to relax too deeply, the cold will exploit that lapse, drawing heat from your extremities with a silent and unforgiving efficiency. As the night deepens, dampness permeates everything. You notice it in the air, thick and heavy, in the smell of wet wool and clay walls, in the chill that seems to follow you wherever you go. Pneumonia whispers through the dormitories and workhouses like a hidden visitor, touching those too exhausted to fight back. You cough. Your chest is tight, and you know that each gasp of cold air is a risk. The coughs of others around you mingle with the moans of frostbitten bodies, a chorus of suffering that fills the long, unlit halls. You think of the tubercular infections that thrive in these conditions, spreading quietly from one body to the next, and shiver anew not from cold, but from dread. Your hands are particularly vulnerable. You attempt to wrap them in whatever cloth you can find, but thin rags do little to protect against the night's assault. You recall the hands of an older man you passed by in a crowded shelter, blackened at the tips, joints swollen and useless. He had tried to light a fire that barely lasted, and when you glanced at him, he gave a faint smile, a grimace, really, as if acknowledging that survival is measured in degrees of frost endured. You flex your fingers experimentally, wincing at the stabbing pain that erupts where skin meets ice. You know, in a way that cannot be ignored, that even small lapses in movement or warmth could cost you the use of your fingers, perhaps forever. Feet are no less at risk. They are pressed into boots soaked from trudging through snow and ice, blistered and cold. You have seen toes turn black and blue in the morning light, limbs discarded to save the rest of the body. The idea seems impossible to your mind when you first hear it, but it is a reality as cruel as any fable. You drag your feet slowly over the cold floorboards, careful to avoid sudden pressure or friction, knowing that even a simple misstep can trigger an avalanche of pain in muscles and joints stiffened by frost. And yet, you must keep moving, for stillness is death in the cold. You are not alone in this. In the narrow alleyways and hidden corners, the bodies of the weary press together for warmth, a grim attempt at shared survival. But human contact only does so much. The cold seeps between bodies, slipping through cracks in clothing, probing skin, finding every opportunity to take what it can. You feel it in your ribs, in your thighs, in the tips of your ears. The warmth of others is a fragile illusion, broken each time someone shifts or wakes, leaving you exposed once again to the merciless night. Hunger compounds the misery. Your stomach twists in protest, empty and demanding energy you do not have. The cold consumes calories at an alarming rate, each shiver and each step draining what little fuel you possess. Without proper nourishment, your body's defenses against frostbite and infection falter. You remember the small stew you were offered earlier, watery and barely warmed, and how the hot broth had been a fleeting comfort before the chill reclaimed you. You eat slowly, tasting each morsel, knowing that food is another form of armor against the night, and yet the armor is thin. Sleep, when it comes, is broken. Every shiver rouses you. Every sound of wind slipping through broken window panes or cracks in walls makes your heart skip a beat. You lie curled into yourself, trying to preserve heat, aware that the blood has retreated from your extremities to protect your core. Your fingers feel alien, stiff, almost foreign, and your toes throb with warning. You close your eyes, willing yourself to drift, but the night is long, and your body is a battleground. Each hour survived feels like a small triumph, a negotiation with an indifferent world that shows neither mercy nor recognition. Dawn eventually arrives, pale and gray, and with it comes the first examination of damage wrought overnight. Crawlers emerge from the shadows, each showing signs of what the night has taken. Frozen hands, toes lost, cheeks chapped and raw from the wind. You study your own reflection in the icy puddles along the street, noting the red sting in your nose, the dark circles beneath your eyes, and the slight swelling in your fingers. These are the markers of endurance, of a body that has been tested beyond comfort, and you know that each day survived is both victory and a quiet debt paid to the cold. Illness lingers, too. Pneumonia spreads silently, striking the young, the old, and the already weakened. Tuberculosis festers in the damp corners of crowded shelters, feeding on poor ventilation and stagnant warmth. You hear the coughs that never end, the rasping breaths that punctuate the quiet, and you understand that survival is never guaranteed. Each breath is a calculated risk, each step a decision between necessity and safety. Even simple acts like washing or changing clothes are complicated by the cold, which makes every movement costly in energy and warmth. Despite all of this, you endure. You press forward, one shivering step after another, guided by necessity, instinct, and the faint hope that warmth might be found somewhere just ahead. You learn the rhythms of frostbite, the subtle warnings of hypothermia, the signs that infection is creeping in. You adapt your movements, you ration heat and energy. You cling to the fragile human connections that offer solace against an otherwise indifferent world. The night is merciless, yes, but it is also a teacher, imparting lessons in resilience, observation, and the brutal calculus of survival. You discover a strange intimacy with the cold, an understanding that it is neither enemy nor friend, but force. It tests, it takes, it shapes. You learn to respect it, to anticipate its moods, to guard against its subtle predations. The physical toll is severe, relentless, and often cruel. Yet in enduring it, you also learn the limits and strengths of your own body. Each frost-bitten finger, each aching joint, each cough born from damp and chill becomes part of the narrative of survival, written on the body in ink of pain and endurance. By the end of the night, when the gray light of dawn weakly illuminates frost-covered streets, you feel the weight of what has been endured. The physical toll is visible in your stiff muscles, your chapped skin, your weary eyes, and in the knowledge that each day you navigate these conditions without succumbing is a triumph. Yet the threat never ceases. Frost, damp, disease, they are always waiting, patient, unrelenting. And still, you move forward, learning, enduring, surviving, a testament to the human body's stubbornness in the face of an unfeeling cold. The morning air is sharp and thin, pricking your lungs with each breath as you step out into the streets. Hunger gnaws at you, a persistent ache that has taken residence deep in your belly. It is a companion that never leaves, a constant reminder of need and deprivation. You feel it with every movement. Your steps are slower, deliberate, measured against the emptiness in your stomach. Your hands tremble slightly, betraying the effort it takes to keep yourself upright. Food is not merely sustenance here. It is survival, obsession, and a silent, unrelenting master that dictates thought, action, and emotion. Every decision you make is influenced by this hunger, shaping your day from the moment you awaken until sleep finally drags you into its fragile reprieve. Breakfast is rarely guaranteed. You have learned not to expect it, to move without hope for the comfort of a warm meal. The mission may offer soup or a crust of bread, but it is never enough, and it is never certain. Often, before you can reach the table or receive your portion, others move faster, claiming what you had counted on. You remember a morning when you had been standing in line for what seemed like hours, the thin crust of bread in your mind already tasted and chewed, only to see it snatched from the hands of another before it could reach you. The betrayal is quiet, almost imperceptible, a shuffle of feet, a muffled curse, a flash of desperation, but it leaves you empty. The hunger sharper, the day stretching endlessly before you with nothing to quell it. You clutch your empty hands to your stomach and press on, knowing that the city offers no reprieve for weakness. Markets are a battlefield. You navigate crowded stalls and back alleys, watching for scraps, discarded pieces of bread, fruits too bruised for the shopkeepers to sell. You sift through bins, careful not to attract notice, careful not to be caught by those who see you as a nuisance rather than a human being. Every scrap is precious, a momentary triumph over the constant gnawing in your stomach. You memorize the rhythm of the market, the opening of barrels, the shifting of crates, the moment when a vendor turns to bargain with a customer, leaving unattended the leftovers that may mean the difference between life and death. Hunger sharpens your senses in ways that surprise you. Your eyes see the smallest crumbs. Your fingers can detect the faintest rustle. Your ears catch the subtle sounds of opportunity before they vanish. But even when you succeed, even when you manage to snatch a stale piece of bread or a half-rotten apple, the hunger remains. It is insatiable, persistent, and unyielding. Stomach cramps have become a rhythm to which your body has adapted. They surge in waves, ebbing and flowing like a tide that cannot be controlled. You feel them tighten in the quiet moments, when you are trying to rest, forcing you to shift your weight, press your hands against your abdomen, and breathe slowly to manage the pain. These cramps shape every thought, making concentration a battle, making every action a calculation against the emptiness that threatens to overwhelm you. You have learned to anticipate them, to move and act according to their rhythm, adjusting your pace, your focus, your very breathing to accommodate the constant companion that is hunger. Survival strategies form a web of habits and observations. You know which markets discard bread late in the day, which bakers toss pastries too hard for sale, which stalls leave scraps near the edges for the unseen and unworthy. You navigate with care, avoiding confrontations, watching for other crawlers, scavengers who may claim what you have spotted first. Every morsel is a victory, but every victory is temporary. You chew slowly, savoring texture and taste, aware that the next hour will demand another scavenging expedition, another negotiation with the emptiness that resides inside you. Hunger becomes not just a sensation, but a framework for existence, dictating your movements, your alliances, your priorities. Even meals from charitable sources come with uncertainty. Soup, when it is available, is thin and watery, often more symbolic than sustaining. Bread is stale, dense, sometimes infested with insects or mildewed from poor storage. Yet it is treasured as though it were a delicacy. You have seen others turn their noses in disgust, refusing portions that could sustain them for hours, and you shake your head, understanding that survival does not allow for pride. Every bite is a compromise, every swallow a temporary truce with the gnawing inside. The stomach emptiness lingers, shadowing every thought, shaping decisions, altering perceptions. Hunger colors your world, tints your interactions with others, and informs every risk you take in the pursuit of food. The theft of food is a common reality, a constant threat that shadows every opportunity. You have learned to protect what you claim, clutching scraps close to your chest, covering them with your body, even as your arms ache from the weight. You have seen others snatched by those quicker, stronger, or more desperate, and you understand that vigilance is as essential as speed. A moment of distraction can cost you the meal you have labored to obtain, leaving you weaker, more desperate, and more exposed to the dangers of the day. Hunger, in this sense, is not merely physical, it is a predator, shaping behavior, sharpening instincts, and dictating the terms of engagement with the world around you. Communal spaces, often crowded and chaotic, are both a blessing and a curse. You find yourself sharing scraps with other crawlers, trading morsels, pooling resources, and sometimes facing the moral dilemma of scarcity. To share is to risk your own survival. Yet not to share may invite conflict or social reprisal within the small networks that sustain you. You navigate these relationships carefully, aware that alliances are as fragile as the bread you hold in your hands. Hunger tests character, forcing decisions that weigh compassion against self-preservation. Every bite becomes a lesson, every meal a negotiation of ethics and instinct. Nights are the hardest. You curl in alleys, doorways, or hidden corners, pressing whatever clothing or rags you have to your chest, trying to preserve warmth and stave off the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. The thin, stale remnants you have gathered are rationed carefully, nibbled slowly to stretch their endurance. You dream sometimes of bread fresh from the oven, of thick soups simmering in iron pots, of meals that fill rather than merely sustain. But when you wake, the reality of scarcity returns, and the emptiness in your belly is renewed, insistent, unyielding. Hunger is unrelenting, a constant companion that never rests, never forgives, never forgets. Even the act of scavenging itself is dangerous. You traverse narrow alleys, climb over crates, squeeze through fences, all while mindful of other scavengers, watchful bakers, and occasionally the hostile eyes of shopkeepers who consider you less than human. The pursuit of food requires agility, cunning, and an unshakable awareness of your surroundings. Hunger sharpens these instincts, heightening alertness, amplifying the senses, and compelling action with a singular clarity. You move with purpose, guided by need, and every success reinforces the tenuous thread of survival that binds you to the world. And yet, despite all the challenges, there is a rhythm to this existence. You learn to anticipate hunger's patterns, to plan for the day's scavenging, to ration what little you acquire, and to navigate the networks of others in similar circumstances. Hunger becomes both a curse and a teacher, shaping your body, mind, and spirit. It defines your world, structures your days, and informs every action. You are never free from it, never able to ignore it, yet you endure. driven by the primal necessity of sustenance and the hope always fragile that the next meal will be enough to keep you moving, thinking, surviving. The gnawing emptiness of your stomach is not a sensation you can escape. It accompanies you, a constant reminder of fragility and need. You have learned to live with the pain, to adjust to its rhythms, and to navigate the world it shapes. Markets, missions, scraps, stolen crumbs, they are all part of the dance, the endless negotiation with scarcity. Hunger is not merely an absence of food, it is an active force, shaping thoughts, dictating action, demanding ingenuity, and testing endurance. And you, like all those who share your fate, move through its presence with caution, with cunning, and with a relentless drive to survive. By nightfall, you find yourself curled into a shadowed corner, clutching the remnants of the day's scavenging. The warmth of the streets has faded, replaced by the chill that creeps through your clothing and into your bones. Your stomach growls, a low, insistent drumbeat that refuses to quiet, even as your eyes close and exhaustion claims your body. You dream of meals that are never quite realized, of the comfort of warmth and fullness, yet the gnawing hunger remains, a reminder that tomorrow will bring the same challenge, the same struggle, the same companion that never leaves. Hunger, relentless and unyielding, is woven into the very fabric of your life, a constant shadow and a companion that shapes everything you are, everything you do, and everything you will become. Night wraps the city around you like a suffocating cloak, heavier than any coat you possess. The lamplighters have long finished their rounds, and the flickering gaslights struggle against the vast darkness spilling over crooked rooftops and narrow alleyways. In these shadowed streets, every step you take is measured, cautious, wary of threats that do not announce themselves. You move quietly, pressing closer to the walls, feeling the damp seep through your thin shoes, and listening. The night speaks in whispers, a scuffle, a distant cough, the scurry of tiny claws across cobblestone. Here, dangers are invisible, yet no less deadly for their silence. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, but they are not enough to protect you. Every alley seems to hide another hand waiting to steal, another boot poised to strike. Theft is an omnipresent hazard. The slightest distraction, the smallest lapse of vigilance, and something as trivial as a patch of cloth or a torn rag, your only protection from the cold, can vanish in the blink of an eye. You clutch your bundle closer, the fabric damp from the night mist, feeling its rough texture, knowing that even this meager shield is valuable enough to invite predators. You remember seeing a fellow crawler yanked from his corner just because the stranger desired a scrap of wool. By morning, he had nothing left but the thin shirt on his back. Constables patrol these streets, their presence as frightening as the criminals. You have seen them before, figures cloaked in authority, sticks raised, eyes cold. They patrol not to protect, but to enforce order as they see fit, often at the expense of those who have nothing. Crawlers like you are considered vermin, their survival a nuisance to be stamped out. You have felt the sting of the nightstick, the push of a boot against your ribs, the rough hands dragging you to the street's edge, all for the crime of existing where you do not belong. The word vagrancy hangs in the air like a weapon. Even the softest footsteps cannot hide you from those who wield authority indiscriminately. You learn quickly to curl smaller, to flatten against walls, to make yourself as invisible as the dark itself, for resistance only invites more pain. And yet, for all the human threats, the city teems with creatures far smaller, yet equally relentless. Rats, bold, insatiable, move like shadows among shadows. They swarm in the spaces where the human eye fails to penetrate, under tables, behind broken barrels, across the gaps between floorboards. You have awakened in the middle of the night to the tickling brush of their tiny paws against your hands, the faint, gnawing sensation of claws probing for warmth and food. Their noses twitch against your sleeve, your ankle, the meager crumbs that have fallen from dinner long since eaten. You freeze, holding your breath, feeling the little beasts inspect your presence as if you were just another portion of the city's refuse. There is no malice in them, only hunger, but their touch is cold and insistent, and sleep becomes a fragile, fleeting luxury. In the darkness, even movement is a gamble. You shift to find a more comfortable position, only to discover that the bundle of rags you thought secure has been tugged at in your absence. You catch the faintest sound of something slipping into the night, the rustle of cloth against damp stone. Instinctively, you spring to your feet, heart hammering, but the shadows have swallowed the thief. There is no chance to retrieve what is lost. The night claims what it can, indifferent to your plight. And so you learn to carry everything close, to wrap your bundle with both hands, to hug it to your chest as though it were the only anchor in a world gone mad. The constant threat of human aggression keeps you alert in ways that are exhausting. You remember the time a constable, impatient with your presence near the workhouse steps, yanked you by the sleeve, his boot connecting with your shin. Pain shot through you, sharp and sudden, leaving bruises that throbbed long after the assault. The surrounding alley remained silent. The constable disappeared into the mist, leaving you to nurse your injuries in the cold, alone. You have become accustomed to this tension, the knowledge that any step, any slight movement could trigger a violent encounter. The streets are a test of patience, agility, and endurance. And each night survived feels like a minor victory against forces both human and animal. Your companions in these streets are few, yet the night occasionally offers fleeting connections. Other crawlers pass by, eyes wary, hands clutching meager possessions, each as cautious as you. Sometimes, a nod or a whispered warning crosses the distance between you, a subtle acknowledgement that the dangers are shared, that the darkness is alive with threats. But even trust is fragile here. Those who seem allies can be thieves when hunger strikes hardest. You have learned that friendship is transient, and each encounter must be weighed with suspicion. The line between safety and peril is so thin that even the smallest gesture, a glance, a hand reaching for a cloth can determine survival. Beyond theft and violence, the darkness is alive with creatures that exist solely in the margins of human awareness. Rats, as persistent as any constable, explore every nook, gnawing through scraps, feasting on leftovers, crawling over bodies pressed together for warmth. You feel them pass beneath your limbs while lying in what you hope is a safe corner. You stiffen, too weary to move, too frightened to stir. Their tiny claws tap against your skin, a reminder that even when no human eye watches, survival is never assured. Hunger drives them, yes, but the sensation of their presence is visceral, pressing against your awareness, a constant, subtle threat. Food, or the lack of it, is another invisible danger. Crumbs, stale bread, scraps of meat left carelessly in the alley invite attention from both animals and people alike. You have seen fights break out over morsels, barely large enough for one mouth. A single piece of bread can trigger a scuffle, hands grasping, sticks swinging, voices shouting. You clutch your own meager supplies, counting every crumb as if it were a treasure. To lose it is to invite desperation, both in yourself and in others. And yet, sharing is sometimes unavoidable, for hunger softens the fiercest hearts sometimes. Other times, it hardens them, and the night rewards aggression over cooperation. The darkness carries sound differently. Every cough, every scuffle, every shuffle of a rat's claws resonates through alleyways like a warning bell. You have learned to distinguish the signs, the subtle shift in air when a constable approaches, the faint rustle of rags that betray a thief, the soft patter of tiny feet signaling vermin in the immediate vicinity. Each sound demands vigilance, a quick calculation of risk and reaction. Sleep is punctuated by these noises, never complete, and when exhaustion threatens to overcome you, it is the awareness of these invisible threats that forces you to remain alert. You have discovered, too, that the environment itself is treacherous. Mud slicks along the cobblestones, puddles that reflect the faint glow of distant lamps, debris hidden beneath the darkness all contribute to the peril. A misstep can lead to injury, leaving you vulnerable to theft, assault, or attack by creatures that prowl unseen. You navigate these hazards slowly, deliberately, feeling with each footfall for the safe ground beneath. Each inch of progress is a careful negotiation between visibility and vulnerability, light and shadow, presence and absence. Despite all of this, life continues in these shadowed corners. Crawlers like you survive through ingenuity, vigilance, and the occasional kindness of strangers who offer a scrap of bread or a quiet warning of danger. You learn to read the night, to anticipate where constables might strike, where rats might congregate, where theft is likely. Your senses sharpen in response to the threats, and you develop a rhythm to existence that is both exhausting and necessary. Survival is not merely a matter of endurance, it is an art, honed under pressure, refined in darkness, and tested every single night. And still, fear is never absent. You awaken repeatedly, heart racing, to shadows that might conceal a thief or a constable, to the subtle shift in a pile of rags that might reveal hungry rats. Every night is a rehearsal for disaster, a continuous performance in which you must anticipate the unpredictable. You develop habits to protect yourself, curling tightly around your bundle, listening for the smallest sound, remaining as motionless as possible when confronted by potential threats. Your body learns the language of vigilance, your mind the calculus of risk, and together they form a fragile shield against a world that seems to delight in testing every limit. By dawn, when the faint light of day creeps into alleyways and doorways, you emerge, tense but alive. You check your possessions, noting what remains and what has been taken. You count your injuries, assess the damage, and prepare to do it all over again. Theft, violence, rats, the invisible dangers that lurk in the shadows, they have all made their mark, but you endure. Each night teaches resilience, cunning, and the painful knowledge that the darkness is never empty, never safe, and never forgiving. The alleys are narrow, and the air is thick with the odor of damp, sweat, and human suffering. You move carefully through the crowded streets, feeling the press of bodies on all sides, each one struggling for warmth, for space, for survival. But it is not only cold and hunger that stalk you in these passages. It is something more insidious, invisible, yet relentless. Illness lurks here, waiting patiently for the opportunity to claim another body. And you know, with a sinking certainty, that no precautions, no cunning, can fully protect you. Disease is not a matter of chance. It is the inevitable companion of those who live in the margins. And tonight, it walks beside you as silently as shadow. Tuberculosis is everywhere. You feel it in the thin coughs that echo through narrow corridors, in the rattling of frail chests, in the hollow, sunken eyes of those who have walked these streets for too long. The disease is carried on breath, on the touch of hands pressed together for warmth, on the very air you inhale. You watch a young girl stagger past, clutching her chest, coughing so violently that tears stream down her cheeks. Yet no one offers aid. They have learned that to help is futile, that illness is inevitable, that a hand extended in kindness may only hasten its own fall. You touch your own ribs instinctively, feeling the tightness that comes not from cold alone, but from knowing that your own breath could betray you to the sickness that waits in every corner. Skin diseases are equally merciless. You notice sores along the neck of a man crouched against the wall, scabs crusted and yellowed, a stark contrast against pale, washed-out skin. They itch, they burn, they fester, and yet they remain untreated. You remember the last time you tried to help a companion with a similar affliction. There was no ointment, no medicine, no healer to tend the wound, only cloth, damp and ragged, and your own desperate attempts to keep infection at bay. It was a futile effort. By dawn, the man had not survived the night. His body had succumbed to a simple affliction that, in another place, might have been nothing more than an irritation. Here, in these streets, it is death in disguise. Lice infestations are equally commonplace, their presence a constant torment. You feel the creeping itch along your scalp, the tiny pinpricks as creatures crawl along your skin, seeking nourishment. You try to scratch discreetly, but it is hopeless. The lice are relentless, multiplying with each passing hour, spreading disease, aggravating wounds, gnawing at patience and sanity alike. You see other crawlers swatting at themselves in frustration, swearing under their breath, trying to remove the tiny creatures that cling with a persistence born of necessity. There is no shame here, only the raw reality that to live is to endure the infestations, to coexist with creatures that thrive upon your suffering. A minor injury is no longer minor. You remember stepping over a broken barrel one evening, catching your foot on a jagged edge, and feeling the sharp cut along your shin. You bandaged it with a strip of cloth, rinsed it in cold water that did nothing to cleanse, and then pressed on. That night, fever gripped you, your limb throbbing, swelling, and turning a shade that made your stomach churn. Infection had claimed the wound while you slept, a silent thief in the night. You had no physician to visit, no medicine to quell the growing pain. Only time and chance, neither of which is generous, determined whether the infection would remain contained or spread, devouring tissue and strength alike. By morning, your gait was limping. The pain was a constant drumbeat that reminded you how fragile your body had become. You pass others who are similarly marked by illness. The eyes of a young boy meet yours as he coughs, a wet, rattling sound that echoes through the alley. His face is pale, his lips tinged with blue, and his small hands shake as he holds them to his chest. You sense the inevitability, the cruel arithmetic that has already been calculated. Survival is measured not by courage or spirit here, but by the random grace of the body and the night. Some will live, others will fall. There is no distinction between innocence and guilt, strength and weakness. Disease is impartial, and you are part of its relentless calculus. In the corners of abandoned buildings and empty lots, you see the other victims of circumstance. Men, women, and children huddled together, their breathing shallow, their bodies marked with sores and scars, each one a map of suffering etched into flesh. You hear murmurs of fevered speech, whispers of dreams and regrets, and even in your own exhaustion, a shiver runs down your spine. You are reminded that illness here is as much a part of the city as the cobblestones, as constant as the cold, as unyielding as the night. It is not a visitor, it is a resident. Wounds are particularly cruel in this environment. A scraped elbow, a torn hand from a fall, a puncture from a nail in the street, all are invitations to catastrophe. You think of the man who tripped while carrying a bundle of rags, slicing his forearm on a jagged piece of metal. The wound, left untreated, became festering, the infection spreading faster than any help could arrive. His cries filled the alley, and yet no one could intervene. Those with strength enough to act are too preoccupied with their own survival. By the next evening, the man was gone, claimed not by violence, but by a silent, patient killer that thrives in the shadows. Infection, untreated, and unopposed. You yourself have felt the creeping dread of a minor cut or bruise. Each twinge of pain is magnified by the knowledge that care is scarce, that even simple remedies, herbs, bandages, warmth, are luxuries that exist only in memory or imagination. You watch your own hands, scanning for signs of discoloration, swelling, or fever, aware that even the smallest wound can become a gateway to something far worse. The city is a petri dish of misery, and your body is both participant and target, tested continuously, with stakes that are life or death. Tuberculosis is the shadow that never lifts. You feel its presence in the coughs of those around you, in the faint fevered sheen that coats the skin of a passing woman, in the gaunt frame of a child whose ribs are visible beneath threadbare clothing. The disease moves silently, efficiently, claiming strength and breath alike. You inhale its presence unknowingly, exhale it in close quarters, and pray silently that your own body will resist the invasion. Each night, each crowded room, each close contact is a gamble. Survival depends on luck, on timing, on the fragile balance between your body's resilience and the city's relentless exposure to disease. Despite all this, life persists. Crawlers like you adapt in almost imperceptible ways. You learn to recognize the early signs of infection in others, to avoid contact when possible, and to ration energy and warmth for recovery. You learn that hygiene is relative, that cloth must be washed in cold water and left to dry on lines that may themselves be host to lice and vermin. You learn to care for minor injuries with ingenuity, poultices made of mud or herbs, careful bandaging, constant vigilance. Yet no matter how cautious, no matter how clever, the city's environment remains a constant threat. Illness is unavoidable, a fact that neither skill nor caution can fully erase. The emotional toll is as heavy as the physical. You carry the weight of knowing that any companion, any neighbor, may fall suddenly, leaving only silence where there had been voice and laughter. The fear of disease shapes your interactions, your movements, your very perception of the night. You hesitate to share warmth or space, even when it is the only barrier against frost. You weigh kindness against risk, friendship against exposure. Every choice is haunted by the invisible threat of infection, every step shadowed by the inevitability of sickness. And yet you continue. Each morning brings the familiar relief of surviving another night, a cautious optimism that is fragile but necessary. You assess wounds, tend to the smallest injuries with what materials are available, and brace yourself for the next night, knowing that the cycle of exposure, injury, and disease will repeat. Tuberculosis, skin afflictions, lice, infection, they are all companions on this journey, unavoidable, impartial, and constant. You navigate them with awareness, with ingenuity, and with a somber acknowledgement that in this world, illness is not a possibility, but a certainty. By the end of the week, the toll of exposure and disease is evident in your body. The fatigue that never fully departs, the thin sheen of sweat from fever, the tender bruises that refuse to heal. You see it in others as well, the pallor of skin, the hollow cheeks, the uncertain gait, the coughs that never cease. The city itself seems to absorb and reflect the suffering of its inhabitants, a mirror of human fragility and endurance. Survival is a narrow path, marked by vigilance, adaptation, and endurance. And every day you walk it with the knowledge that the next illness, the next infection, may arrive without warning, indifferent to courage or will. The first time you step through the doors of the mission, the scent of burning candles and the faintly sweet odor of simmering broth washes over you. You hesitate at the threshold, the polished wooden floor gleaming under flickering lanterns, the rows of benches filled with silent faces, all of them weary, hungry, and waiting. A voice, booming and solemn, cuts through the hush, calling for attention, for obedience, for reflection. The sermon begins, and you realize quickly that charity here is never free. It is a transaction, a performance of morality, and your worth must be demonstrated before even a crust of bread or a thin bowl of soup is offered. You sit, tense, shivering in your threadbare coat, wondering if you can measure up to the expectations that hang over the hall like a heavy, invisible weight. The preacher's voice rises and falls, a rhythmic cadence that alternates between scolding and admonishing, guiding and warning. You listen carefully, nodding at the appropriate times, your body mimicking the movements expected of you. Hands folded, eyes lowered, posture straight. Every detail matters. A lapse in attention could mark you as unworthy, someone who has not absorbed the moral lesson, or, worse, someone who does not deserve the charity being offered. You hear stories of prodigality, of sin, of idleness, and realize that the mission sees you not simply as a human being in need, but as a canvas upon which morality is written. Your hunger is secondary. Your body is a testing ground for your spirit. The sermon is long, and your stomach growls in protest. You shift on the hard bench, feeling the cold seep through your clothing. The words of the preacher swirl around you, heavy with judgment and expectation. You are reminded that the mission does not exist merely to feed the hungry, to shelter the cold, or to offer comfort. Its purpose is to instruct, to guide, and to ensure that aid is dispensed according to a strict set of moral rules. You are a participant in a ritual, a trial of patience and obedience, and only those who demonstrate proper conduct may partake in the reward. Finally, after what feels like hours, the sermon draws to a close. A hush falls over the room as the volunteers begin their work, ladles in hand, bowls clattering against one another. The smell of soup, thin and watery, fills the air. Bread, hard and dense, is distributed carefully, portioned according to need or according to perceived merit, whichever the attendants deem more appropriate. You rise, moving slowly through the line, aware that every movement is scrutinized. You bow your head slightly, offer a quiet word of thanks, and accept your ration with hands steady despite hunger that is sharpened into a dull, gnawing ache. The food is meager, but for now it is enough. The warmth of the broth spreads through your body, a reprieve from the cold that lingers both outside and within. But the rules of behavior are not confined to the mission hall alone. They extend to every interaction, every request, every glance you offer. A misstep, too eager a glance at another's portion, Too casual a tone when speaking to a volunteer can mark you as unworthy. You have observed others who falter, whose expressions betray impatience or resentment. They are turned away, left to shuffle out into the streets, bowls empty, spirits dampened. You wonder if the fairness of this system has any connection to justice, or if it is simply another layer of control, a way to reinforce a hierarchy even among those with the least. Hunger does not discriminate, yet charity does. It is conditional, exacting, and harsh in its moral calculations. Outside the mission, the streets are colder, rougher. You watch as others attempt to gather what they can from scraps, from alleyways, from sympathetic neighbors. Some are turned away entirely, deemed morally unworthy. Their pasts and behaviors weighed against an invisible ledger of sin. You hear whispers of those who begged, who stole, who were judged to have strayed too far from propriety. The mission will not help them. Their hunger is their punishment, their suffering a reflection of supposed moral failings. You step lightly over frozen puddles and broken cobblestones, aware that every action you take could influence the judgment cast upon you. The line between survival and judgment is thin, and walking it requires vigilance. In the evenings, when the missions close their doors and the streets darken, you contemplate the paradox of this conditional lifeline. Charity, meant to sustain, to protect, to nurture, is filtered through sermons, lectures, and rules. You recall the countless faces you have seen: haggard men, women with hollow cheeks, children with wide eyes that have seen too much suffering, all navigating the same maze of moral expectation for the sake of a crust of bread. You realize that survival requires more than physical endurance. It requires performance, a careful navigation of social and religious expectations, and a continual assessment of what behaviors are deemed acceptable. You have learned to smile at the right moments, to bow, to appear humble, to conceal frustration and fear. The smallest misjudgment could render you invisible to those with the power to offer aid. You notice patterns. Those who arrive early, polite, and attentive are more likely to receive their full portion. Those who stumble, speak out of turn, or fail to observe the rituals of the hall leave with less or nothing at all. You have seen children turned away, their small hands outstretched, because the volunteers judged them too unruly to deserve sustenance. Hunger in this context becomes not merely a physical state, but a measure of virtue or vice. You feel the injustice in this keenly, yet you adapt. To survive, you must present yourself in the right way, perform morality convincingly, and ensure that your behavior aligns with the unspoken standards that govern aid. The sermons themselves are a spectacle, designed to instruct as much as to punish. You listen to tales of the prodigal, the idle, the sinful, interwoven with scripture and moralizing stories. You feel the weight of expectation pressing down on you, and as the preacher's words rise and fall, you sense the unspoken message. Charity is not unconditional. You must earn it, justify it, prove that you are worthy not only of sustenance, but of the dignity that accompanies it. Hunger is a test, a lens through which character is examined, and you understand that the mission is as much about shaping behavior as it is about providing food. You learn quickly, adjusting your posture, your attention, and your expressions to fit the pattern that will allow you to receive aid. Even the act of eating is controlled. You are seated according to rank or perceived need, allotted space on benches, and monitored by volunteers. You sip the thin soup slowly, chew the hard bread deliberately, mindful that excess, haste, or greed will be noticed. Every bite is an exercise in restraint, a demonstration of decorum that ensures your place in the fragile order of the hall. You are acutely aware that the warmth of the broth is temporary, the bread filling only until your next exposure to cold and hunger. Yet it sustains you, if only for a short while, and the relief is sharp, almost overwhelming, after hours of cold, empty waiting. After meals, the sermon resumes in a quieter, more targeted form. Volunteers provide instructions, corrections, and warnings about behavior, hygiene, and conduct outside the mission. You learn the proper way to beg, the right tone to strike when requesting food, and the humility expected in every interaction. There is no room for pride or defiance. Those who stray from the accepted patterns are reminded, often publicly, of the consequences. The lessons are harsh, delivered with an air of inevitability, leaving little doubt that the mission's authority extends beyond the walls of the building into every aspect of the lives of those it serves. As you leave the hall, the evening streets are darker still. You clutch your portion, the warmth of the soup fading quickly in the cold night air. You pass others similarly sustained, each walking carefully, wary of missteps, aware that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same negotiations, the same necessity of performance. Hunger is constant, morality is scrutinized, and charity is conditional. You navigate these streets with a new awareness, every step measured, every gesture calculated, every word weighed against the invisible ledger of virtue and sin that dictates access to survival. By the time you find a corner to rest, your body is tired, your stomach is only partially full, and you reflect on the paradox of this lifeline. Charity sustains, yes, but it does so only in exchange for conformity, humility, and obedience. You have witnessed countless instances of those denied aid for a misstep or a moment of impatience. You have learned the subtle rituals, the proper attitudes, the necessary gestures to secure what meager sustenance is available. And yet, even as you find reprieve in a shadowed alley, you are acutely aware that this conditional lifeline is as fragile as it is essential. One miscalculation, one lapse, and the gift is withdrawn, leaving only hunger, cold, and the unyielding night. The city mornings are gray and damp, the streets slick with the residue of last night's drizzle. You wake under the thin layer of blankets you have scavenged, newspaper tucked between rags to guard against the relentless chill. Every crease of paper pressed against your back feels slightly warmer than the bare stone beneath, yet it is a fragile comfort, easily disturbed by the shifting of your own body or the movement of another huddled nearby. The tea kettle, if there is one, hisses softly, promising warmth that is as fleeting as the day itself. You stretch stiff limbs, feeling the ache of muscles that have not known ease, and reach for the small pleasures that keep the night's cold from fully claiming you. Tea is a ritual, not a luxury. Brewed from leaves that have seen many boilings before, it smells faintly of decay, yet the moment it touches your lips, you feel a warmth that spreads through your chest. You sip carefully, not for taste, but for the reprieve it brings. The heat flows slowly into your hands when you cup the chipped tin mug, seeping into fingers numb from nights spent on wet stone. You close your eyes and imagine it is more than liquid. Imagine it is the sun, the hearth, a hand pressed gently against your back. But the warmth is temporary, dissolving as quickly as the last drop slides down your throat. Still, the act of holding, sipping, and imagining is a small victory against the cold and the despair, a fleeting comfort that reminds you that life persists, even in its most meager forms. Clothing is another battlefield, improvised and patchwork, each layer a testament to ingenuity and endurance. You tuck newspapers into sleeves, between layers of rags, under coats that have lost their buttons long ago. The paper crinkles beneath your arms and against your chest, providing insulation that feels almost miraculous in its simplicity. You are careful to arrange it so that the folds do not tear, so that the warmth remains concentrated in the places most vulnerable to frost. Every crease is intentional, every patch deliberate. It is not elegance, it is survival. You imagine, briefly, a coat woven from soft wool, thick and resilient, but it is a dream that belongs to another world. Here, newspapers and rags are treasures, and each additional layer is a small bulwark against the encroaching cold. Temporary jobs, when they appear, are a lifeline, fragile yet vital. At the market, you lift crates, sweep floors, run errands for vendors who regard you with suspicion and curiosity in equal measure. The coins earned are few, barely enough to buy a slice of bread or a small bit of cheese, but they are a taste of autonomy, a momentary freedom from the precarious negotiation with charity and theft. Each coin is handled with care, tucked away in a pocket that has been patched and repatched until it is nearly as fragile as the paper within your clothing. You think of the small purchases you might make: a loaf slightly fresher than yesterday's, a handful of dried fruit, a scrap of meat for flavoring the watery soup that serves as your midday meal. Yet even as you earn these coins, Insecurity looms. The job could vanish at any moment. A vendor decides you are in the way. A crate falls and you are blamed. The market closes early in the sudden rain, and you are left once more to scavenge and beg. Fleeting relief, you realize, is still relief, and you clutch it tightly while it lasts. Even the simplest objects become precious. A mug, chipped and dented, holds not just tea but the illusion of stability. A scrap of cloth, carefully folded, becomes a pillow for your head, a wall against the chill. You handle these things with care, knowing that their value is not inherent in their material but in what they allow you to endure. You rest briefly, sipping the warm tea, feeling the newspaper beneath your back, counting coins slowly in your pocket. For a moment, the world is manageable, the cold softened, the hunger muted. But you know it will not last. The wind outside whistles through gaps in the buildings. The streets are still slick with mud, and the temporary warmth you cling to is but a whisper of comfort before reality presses back in. Even in these small comforts, there is ritual and attention. Tea must be brewed slowly, leaves carefully strained, temperature tested on your wrist to avoid burning yourself. Newspapers must be folded just so, layers arranged to trap air and provide insulation without tearing. Coins must be counted, considered, and rationed for the coming hours. Every act, no matter how trivial it seems, carries the weight of survival. You move through the day with measured steps, aware that each comfort is transient, each relief fragile. The skill lies in prolonging these moments, stretching warmth, maximizing the value of what little you possess. Your body becomes attuned to subtle signals: the scent of brewing tea, the texture of paper against skin, the weight of a coin in your palm, as though these small acts are the threads that hold your life together. Fleeting relief comes from human contact as well. You share a bench with another crawler for warmth, leaning against one another as best you can without infringing on space or creating tension. You trade whispers about the day's prospects, market locations, and where scraps of food may appear. Trust is tentative, fragile, but it offers warmth beyond that which can be gained from rags or paper. Yet even this human comfort is ephemeral. Movement, necessity, hunger, or fear of theft can sever the bond as quickly as it forms. You learn to cherish the brief intimacy while it exists, to fold it into memory when the other leaves, and to continue forward alone, carrying the small warmth within yourself. The day stretches on with relentless monotony, yet small comforts punctuate the hours. A warm mug of tea between scavenging for bread, a coin tucked into a pocket that feels heavier than its weight, a newspaper folded just so to protect against the wind. Each small relief, though temporary, is a statement: you are alive, you can endure, you can find moments of stability even in chaos. The rituals around these comforts, brewing, folding, counting, become meditative, a way to assert control over a world that otherwise offers little. The cold, the hunger, the uncertainty remain, but these tiny victories remind you that survival is possible, even if only moment by moment. As evening falls, the streets empty of vendors and temporary jobs vanish, leaving you to navigate the cold alone once more. The warmth of the day's tea has faded, coins are tucked away for the rarest emergencies, and newspaper insulation has flattened under the pressure of movement. You find a shadowed doorway, an alley corner, or the faint protection of a workhouse step, and settle into the best position you can. Your body aches from hours of movement, yet even in exhaustion, you cherish the small comforts you carry. The slight warmth of dried tea on your skin, the crinkle of paper beneath your shoulders, the memory of a coin safely pocketed for tomorrow. These fragments of relief are precious because they are brief. After all, they are yours, and because they remind you that even in a harsh, uncaring world, moments of solace exist if you know where and how to seek them. Sleep is never deep, never full. You curl around your small protections, sipping tea still warm against your lips, newspaper tucked as insulation, coins pressing against your thigh as if to remind you that survival is a constant negotiation. Your mind drifts to the fleeting comforts of the day, the warmth of liquid against your stomach, the way paper keeps cold at bay, the satisfaction of earning even a few pennies, and you hold on to them as tightly as you can. You know that tomorrow will bring the same challenges: cold, hunger, labor, and the need to improvise warmth and sustenance from scraps and shadows. Yet the small comforts, though temporary, have reminded you that endurance is possible, that relief can be found in even the most unlikely forms, and that survival is an art of finding, cherishing, and extending moments of warmth and sustenance, no matter how fleeting. By nightfall, the shadows deepen and the streets empty, leaving you alone in the chill. The warmth of the day, tea, coins, newspaper insulation, remains as memory, a fragile thread connecting you to life, to hope, to resilience. Even the smallest act, a sip of tea, a folded sheet of paper, a coin earned through temporary work, carries weight, significance, and the promise of fleeting relief. You close your eyes, the ache in your stomach, a quiet companion, the chill pressing at your skin, and you allow yourself a momentary comfort. The knowledge that you have survived another day, that you have claimed warmth and sustenance, however briefly, and that you can do so again tomorrow, navigating the cold and hunger with patience, ingenuity, and the quiet determination that has carried you this far. Small comforts, fragile as they are, sustain you because they are the threads that stitch the day together, the fleeting reliefs that make life in this relentless world possible. The streets stretch endlessly before you, uneven, damp, and littered with remnants of the day's commerce. You move carefully, your eyes scanning the cobblestones and alleyways, not merely for sustenance but for signs of danger, some immediate, some far more insidious. Social judgment is as constant as the cold, as invisible yet palpable as the wind that cuts through threadbare clothing. Shopkeepers glare at you as you pass, their eyes sharp with suspicion, their hands poised to shoo you away before you can even reach a doorway. You are treated as though you are not merely unwelcome, but inherently unwantable, a fixture of the streets as permanent and disposable as the discarded crates and broken barrels that litter the sidewalks. Every step you take is weighed against the expectations of a society that sees you not as a human being but as a blemish, an inconvenience, a shadow that must be tolerated, if only begrudgingly. Passing by a baker, you feel the heat from the ovens as warmth that you cannot claim. The smell of fresh bread, rich and fragrant, fills your senses and sharpens the ache in your stomach, reminding you that sustenance is often tantalizingly close, yet forever out of reach. You reach instinctively toward the door, hoping for a glimpse of generosity, a crumb dropped unnoticed, a kind glance, but the baker's eyes meet yours, narrow and cold, and his hand waves you off, subtle but unmistakable. You lower your gaze, retreating into the shadows, aware that any expression of hunger, any charity appeal, is met not with compassion but with disdain. You have become accustomed to this treatment. It is as familiar as the chill in your bones. Yet it does not make the humiliation any less piercing. Wealthier citizens navigate these same streets as if you do not exist at all. You have observed them stepping aside, not to offer help or even acknowledgement, but as though you were part of the pavement, a crack or a puddle over which they must carefully navigate. Their shoes click against cobblestones, polished and glinting in the faint light, their coats thick and warm, their posture erect and deliberate. You shrink instinctively, pressing closer to the walls, pretending invisibility is possible when it is not. The eyes of the affluent pass over you without notice, and when recognition occurs, it is almost always tinged with contempt, a glance that communicates the unspoken verdict. You are lesser, undesirable, beneath the concern of those who can afford comfort. You have come to understand that your very presence in these streets challenges the sensibilities of those with privilege, that your hunger, your ragged clothing, and your visible fatigue are judged as failures of morality, character, or will. Newspapers, the very voices of the city, speak of you in language sharp and cruel. Human debris, street refuse. The words jump from printed pages into the consciousness of the public, forming a barrier that cannot be crossed. You have caught glimpses of headlines in the hands of hurried readers, the inked letters carving your existence into symbols of societal failure. Children reading alongside their parents whisper phrases they have overheard. Don't play near the gutters, there's street refuse there. You feel the weight of these judgments press upon you, shaping how strangers regard you even before you appear in their sight. Your body becomes not merely flesh and bone, but an emblem of social stigma, a target for disdain, a lesson in what is to be despised. The cumulative effect of these judgments infiltrates your movements and thoughts. You do not merely walk the streets, you negotiate each step, each glance, each interaction to minimize offense and avoid attention. You learn the subtle cues of shopkeepers, reading the twitch of an eyebrow, the tightening of a jaw, the placement of a hand near a broom or ladle. You adjust your pace, your posture, the tilt of your head, and the timbre of your voice, if you must speak, to convey the minimal presence that will allow passage without confrontation. Every encounter is a calculation, every interaction a risk. Social stigma is an invisible but constant weight, shaping behavior as palpably as hunger shapes the body. Children in these streets are not spared the scrutiny. You have watched younger crawlers huddling together, clutching scraps of bread, while passers-by recoil with exaggerated motions, as though the touch of the street's poor is contagious, morally or physically. Laughter from a child is stifled by a mother's hand, not out of shame alone but out of fear. Fear that recognition might draw punishment, rebuke, or humiliation. You witness peers bending under the weight of judgment before they have learned to bear it with the stoicism that age enforces. The lessons of stigma are taught early, as survival itself becomes intertwined with invisibility, compliance, and careful negotiation of social disdain. Even within the community of crawlers, these judgments exist in a microcosm. You notice subtle hierarchies emerge, not determined by age or skill but by perceived morality, cleanliness, and compliance with unwritten codes. Those who maintain scraps of clothing, manage to appear slightly more presentable, or follow unspoken rules, are sometimes granted small allowances of tolerance. Those who falter are quietly ostracized. Hunger and cold may be shared universally, but social judgment fragments the experience of poverty, introducing competition, shame, and self-regulation as mechanisms of survival. You learn to measure not only your need but your presentation, knowing that the wrong impression may mean eviction from a warm corner, denial of food, or the cold shoulder of peer contempt. Occasionally, confrontation occurs, brutal and unmistakable. A shopkeeper, tired of your presence or anxious about the reaction of wealthier patrons, steps forward with hands raised, broom in motion, voice sharp. You retreat, not because of fear alone, but because social norms have trained you to respond preemptively, to anticipate judgment before it is voiced. You have felt the sting of a push, the flash of a broom across your back, the cold and damp of the streets reinforced by the indignity of force. Each encounter reaffirms your position in a society that measures worth by wealth, propriety, and adherence to arbitrary standards of respectability. You absorb the lesson, adjusting your behavior accordingly, internalizing the hierarchy that exists above, below, and alongside you. The written word compounds the judgment. Newspapers report on the streets, on the poor, often with a tone of moralizing disdain. You see phrases that are meant to shock, to dehumanize, to reinforce the idea that the presence of the street's poor is a social problem rather than a human crisis. You know that these words influence those you encounter daily, shaping expectations and justifying the disdain of shopkeepers, passers-by, and even the authorities. Your existence is filtered through a lens that interprets poverty as fault, weakness, or moral failing, and you are compelled to navigate the world accordingly. Survival depends not only on your agility, your cunning, or your strength, but on your ability to anticipate and mitigate the social judgments that are cast upon you from every angle. These daily encounters, small and large, cumulative and insidious, form a pattern that shapes perception and behavior. You learn to read the city like a text, interpreting facial expressions, gestures, and tones for hidden meaning. You anticipate where disdain is likely to manifest, where avoidance is safe, and where stealth is necessary. Every alleyway, every storefront, every footstep carries the potential for judgment, and you have honed a sensitivity to the subtleties of social disdain. Even when alone, you carry the echo of those judgments within yourself, the awareness of being observed, assessed, and found lacking in ways that matter to the world above your station. By nightfall, after another day navigating the streets, scavenging for scraps, avoiding both hunger and social censure, you find a shadowed corner in which to rest. The echoes of judgment linger, the glares of shopkeepers the indifference of the wealthy, the cruel language of newspapers. You arrange your rags and newspapers for warmth, clutching them as if they can shield you not just from cold, but from the pervasive disdain that has followed you since dawn. The weight of social stigma presses alongside the physical tolls of hunger, cold, and exposure, embedding itself into posture, movement, and thought. Yet even in the face of such unrelenting judgment, you endure. Every day survived is a testament to resilience, a negotiation between visibility and invisibility, self-preservation and moral scrutiny, survival, and the harsh verdicts of a society that sees you as less than human. The streets are narrow, the alleys dark and damp, yet within this harsh world there exists a fragile warmth, a glimmer of connection that seems almost impossible in the cold, uncaring city. You move carefully, navigating over uneven cobblestones and discarded debris, aware of every step, every sound. Hunger, cold, and social disdain have taught you vigilance. But even in such a world, humans are not meant to be entirely alone. Among the crawlers, there exist small, intimate groups, bonded not by blood or law, but by necessity, empathy, and the quiet understanding that survival is easier when shared. You are part of such a group, though the membership is delicate, ephemeral, and as vulnerable as the rags you wrap around yourself. These groups form in the spaces where warmth and solidarity can be carved out of scarcity. You and your companions share blankets and rags, layering them over one another to preserve the heat that the stone streets and winter winds seek to steal. There is a rhythm to these arrangements. Someone sprawls along one edge, another folds into the curve of the first, and the smallest, often the youngest, rests in the center, protected by the makeshift barrier of bodies and cloth. The warmth is fleeting, yet profound, a testament to the human need for touch, for reassurance, for the sense that, in this hostile world, someone is watching over you, guarding you from the cruelty of cold and neglect. You lie close, feeling the rise and fall of others' chests, the brush of a hand, the occasional whisper of encouragement. These small gestures become anchors in a life that is otherwise unmoored. Scraps of food are shared with an unspoken code of fairness. You pass a small portion of bread to a companion whose hunger seems sharper than your own. They, in turn, may slip a stolen piece of cheese or fruit to another, a rotation of mercy and survival that requires observation, trust, and subtle judgment. You have learned to weigh generosity against necessity, understanding that each crumb given is a risk to your own endurance, yet a reinforcement of the bonds that make the night survivable. Hunger is less lonely when shared, less threatening when mitigated through communal effort. And in these exchanges, fleeting as they are, a sense of family emerges, a small, fragile network of care that cushions the constant threat of abandonment, theft, or violence. Warnings circulate quickly. You have learned to listen for them, to heed the faint whispers of caution that precede danger. A constable rounding a corner, a street patrolled too aggressively, a gang of scavengers moving silently among the shadows. These threats are announced through coded gestures, slight nods, or brief murmurs. Someone might tap 3 times on a lamppost, a warning signal understood by those who share the knowledge. You have felt the warmth of protection in these moments, an alert that allows you to retreat, to shift your position, to remain unnoticed. The bonds of the group extend beyond shared warmth and food. They include vigilance, information, and the quiet understanding that survival depends on awareness passed from one to another. Every warning is a thread in the fragile tapestry that keeps you alive for another day. Nicknames develop in these networks, a language of intimacy and acknowledgement that exists outside the scornful world of the wealthy and indifferent. You are no longer merely crawler or beggar. You are Tibby, Little Ash, or Patch, names that carry stories, memories, and small histories. Each name signals recognition, a shared experience, a claim to identity in a society that seeks to erase it. You respond to these names instinctively, a subtle but profound reminder that you belong, even if only temporarily, even if only for the night. These informal family units provide comfort not only through practical survival, but through emotional affirmation, countering the relentless social judgment that seeks to diminish you. The fragility of these bonds is ever present. Trust can be broken in an instant by hunger, desperation, or fear. You have watched disputes arise over scraps of food, over sleeping spots, over perceived slights, and you understand how quickly the delicate network can unravel. Yet the bonds endure because necessity dictates collaboration. When a newborn cries, when a frostbite-stricken hand trembles in need of warmth, when the footsteps of authority approach, the group unites again, reinforcing its protective function. You have learned to navigate this balance, to offer assistance, to accept it, and to read the moods and needs of others with subtlety and care. The emotional intelligence required is immense. Survival demands not only skill and cunning, but empathy and timing, the capacity to anticipate not only danger, but the reactions of those around you. There are small rituals that reinforce cohesion. A shared song murmured before sleep, a story told to distract from the ache of hunger, a tender touch to reassure the youngest members, all serve to maintain the bonds that keep despair at bay. You have experienced nights when these rituals were all that separated hope from resignation, when a whispered joke, a gentle nudge, or the warmth of a shared blanket restored a measure of dignity to a life otherwise defined by scarcity and judgment. These acts are fleeting, yet they linger, imprinting a sense of belonging and humanity that persists even as the dawn brings renewed exposure and hardship. Children in these networks are watched with careful attention. You have bent low to shield them from the cold, passed them scraps of bread, and whispered reassurances. They are the heart of the group, the reason for vigilance, the anchor for collective action. The responsibility of protecting them enhances cohesion. Adults and older children alike adjust positions, ration supplies, and maintain heightened alertness. The bonds among the crawlers are therefore both practical and deeply emotional, forged in the crucible of necessity and tempered by the shared recognition of fragility, vulnerability, and impermanence. Every decision, from the distribution of scraps to the placement of rags for warmth, carries both strategic and emotional weight. Even movement through the city is dictated by these bonds. You do not travel alone. You pair with others for protection, guiding each other past patrolled streets, through alleys, and around the most hostile of market stalls. The sense of partnership is tangible. A hand on a shoulder, a subtle cue to move silently, a glance that conveys danger before words can be spoken. The bonds are fragile because circumstances change. One day, a companion may be too ill to follow. Another may be forced to leave in search of work or safety. Yet the network adapts, extending, retracting, accommodating each individual as best it can. Flexibility is as vital as loyalty. Survival demands both. The shared knowledge of the streets, where to find scraps, which corners provide the least exposure, which buildings offer temporary shelter, is passed down through these groups. You absorb this knowledge not as a solitary learner but as a member of a dynamic collective. Advice is given freely when earned. Warnings are issued with precision, ensuring that no member is left unaware. The emotional bonds reinforce practical survival. Loyalty and care are rewarded, mistakes forgiven where possible, and newcomers cautiously integrated into the fragile hierarchy. You find yourself relying on intuition, honed through observation and empathy, aware that even a minor misstep can disrupt the delicate balance of trust and cooperation. As night falls, the bonds are tested in the most immediate ways. Cold, hunger, and danger intensify, and the group tightens, curling together in alley corners, doorways, or abandoned rooms. Blankets are shared, the warm tea from earlier becomes a communal resource, and whispered encouragement circulates. You feel the significance of these bonds in your bones, a warmth that transcends the thin rags, the newspaper insulation, the flickering candlelight. The night is perilous, yet together you endure it, the emotional and practical support intertwining to create a temporary sanctuary against the indifference of the wider city. Sleep, when it comes, is uneasy but possible. You rest against companions, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing, the weight of their presence anchoring you, the smallest axe a hand brushing against yours, a murmured reassurance. The gentle redistribution of a blanket carries significance far beyond their physicality. These gestures are markers of trust, affirmation, and the quiet resilience of a community forced to exist at the margins. Even when dreams are uneasy, punctuated by hunger and fear, the bonds of the group create a tether to reality, to life, and to the fragile possibility of continuity in a world otherwise defined by scarcity and judgment. By dawn, when the city stirs, these bonds are again tested. Each member of the group must navigate the streets, seek sustenance, and endure exposure, knowing that survival may require temporary separation. Yet the bonds persist in memory, in anticipation of reunion, in the shared understanding that tonight, as the cold falls and hunger presses in, the small, intimate network will reform. You take comfort in this knowledge, in the recognition that even in a world indifferent and hostile, a human connection exists, delicate, impermanent, but profoundly significant. These fragile community bonds are not just lifelines. They are proof that even in hardship, empathy, loyalty, and shared struggle sustain the spirit, as surely as food and warmth sustain the body. The morning light falls weakly over the streets, gray and muted, filtering through the mist that hangs low in the alleys. You step out, your shoes wet and muddy, your coat threadbare and damp from the night's chill. Around you, the city moves in its usual rhythm, indifferent and unseeing. You are part of the shadows now, a figure pressed against walls, shuffling through streets where no one registers your existence. You remember, somewhere deep inside, a life before this, memories of warmth, routine, laughter, but they feel distant, blurred, like smoke escaping through your fingers. Identity, once a given, now feels like a luxury too heavy to carry alongside hunger, cold, and survival. You are no longer defined by occupation, family, or even name. You are simply another crawler, another face in the invisible tide of those discarded by fortune and society. Names, once familiar and vital, have begun to fade from memory. You recall the sound of your own, the syllables spoken by family or friends long gone. Yet when you try to summon it aloud, the memory slips like water. You hesitate to speak it, uncertain if it still belongs to you or if it has been claimed by the street, swallowed by the necessity of becoming someone smaller, someone quieter. Other crawlers around you exhibit the same loss. They respond to nicknames formed in the margins: Little Ash, Patch, Tibby, labels born from circumstance rather than birth, and they accept them without resistance. There is a strange relief in these names. They are functional, practical, unburdened by the past, but they are also markers of what has been lost. The old identities, with their jobs, families, and responsibilities, have been eclipsed by the immediacy of need, leaving you hollowed in a way that even survival cannot fill. Professions, once sources of pride or purpose, dissolve into irrelevance. You remember, faintly, your hands handling tools or books, performing tasks that defined you, brought a sense of contribution, of competence. But now, hands are primarily instruments of survival, picking through refuse for scraps, tending rags, or clutching the few coins earned from temporary work. The skill sets of your former life remain faint echoes, yet they are unrecognized, useless in this world. You have watched others stumble over this realization: the seamstress whose fingers once wove intricate patterns now twisting bread crusts open, the clerk whose mind once organized ledgers now scavenging for coins and warmth. Misfortune has stripped away not just comfort but purpose, leaving a quiet vacancy where pride once lived. Dignity, too, is a casualty. The public glare, the social scorn, and the constant negotiation for survival erode what self-respect remains. You remember moments of embarrassment, the way shopkeepers shooed you away, the disdainful steps of wealthy citizens, the printed words of newspapers branding you street refuse or human debris. You feel the sting not merely in the body but in the soul, the realization that society no longer recognizes your humanity. Every day, every interaction chips away at pride. Every theft, cold night, and denial of aid reinforces the sense that you exist not as a person but as an obstacle, a fixture of the streets to be tolerated or avoided. You learn to move smaller, to speak quieter, to make yourself less visible, less real to the world that insists you are insignificant. Voice, once a tool of expression and communication, diminishes under the weight of survival. You have spoken freely before, with conviction, with laughter, with the authority of someone whose place in the world was acknowledged. Now, conversation is muted, tactical, a whisper in the shadows. You choose words carefully, not to offend, not to draw attention, not to claim more than your meager share of space or warmth. Even laughter is rationed, quiet and subdued, for fear that sound might draw the attention of someone who would punish or shame. You notice others around you doing the same. A collective lowering of volume that marks the erosion of identity, the transformation of presence into mere existence. Your thoughts remain private, contained, because expression beyond survival is a luxury the streets do not afford. Memory itself becomes a fragile commodity. You struggle to recall the details of your former life, the color of walls in your childhood home, the faces of loved ones, the rhythms of days that were once yours to command. In their place, new patterns of behavior take root: scavenging, hiding, conserving warmth, negotiating social scorn, and rationing what little sustenance is available. The old life, vivid once, fades like ink in water, leaving only an abstract impression. You find yourself startled when a fragment surfaces, a fleeting image of a family meal, a workplace routine, or a name long forgotten. But even these glimpses are fleeting, swallowed quickly by the immediacy of the present. Survival demands presence, not nostalgia, and memory is often sacrificed at the altar of endurance. Yet even in this loss, small communities of crawlers form, bonding over shared necessity and empathy. You exchange names, stories, and scraps of food, creating a network that temporarily restores a sense of self. But these connections are fragile, conditional, and ephemeral. The bonds sustain you in the moment, but cannot restore the broader identity stripped away by circumstance. Your role within the group is defined not by who you once were, but by what you can do to survive today. Gather food, guard warmth, relay warnings, share scraps, support the weak. Even your nickname becomes a functional label, a substitute for a history that has been overwritten by misfortune. The process of adaptation is relentless. You learn to merge your former self with the necessities of survival, to let go of pride, ambition, and societal status, and to embrace a quieter, more cautious existence. Every step through crowded streets is measured, every glance considered, every movement calibrated to avoid confrontation, judgment, or theft. You have become attuned to the rhythms of the city, to the nuances of social interaction in the shadows, to the tacit codes that allow crawlers to navigate without drawing excessive attention. Identity is compressed, refined, and in many ways neutralized, leaving only the essential skills and awareness required to persist. Your body becomes a symbol of this transformation. Clothing is worn and patched, rags layered and reused, often borrowed or shared. Each action is calculated, stripped of flourish, a reflection of identity sacrificed for endurance. Even emotions are tempered by the demands of survival. Joy is cautious, laughter subdued, grief is private. Confined to brief moments when solitude permits, fear is constant, calibrated not just to immediate threats of hunger, cold, or violence, but to the broader reality of being invisible, insignificant, unworthy in the eyes of society. Each action is calculated, stripped of flourish, a reflection of identity sacrificed for endurance. Even emotions are tempered by the demands of survival. Joy is cautious, laughter subdued, grief is private, confined to brief moments when solitude permits. Fear is constant, calibrated not just to immediate threats of hunger, cold, or violence, but to the broader reality of being invisible, insignificant, unworthy in the eyes of society. Voice, once a tool of expression and communication, diminishes under the weight of survival. You have spoken freely before, with conviction, with laughter, with the authority of someone whose place in the world was acknowledged. Now, conversation is muted, tactical, a whisper in the shadows. You choose words carefully, not to offend, not to draw attention, not to claim more than your meager share of space or warmth. At night, when you curl beneath layered rags, clutching scraps of warmth and sustenance, you feel the tension between memory and present necessity. You remember fragments of meals, of conversation, of purpose, but they fade quickly in the cold. The city, indifferent, enforces a harsh lesson. To exist is enough. To survive is paramount. And to assert identity beyond survival is dangerous or impossible. You close your eyes, pressing hands to your face or stomach, feeling the lingering ache of hunger, cold, and invisibility, and allow yourself the quiet thought that perhaps, somewhere deep inside, the essence of who you were endures. But even that is fragile, a fleeting companion in a life otherwise defined by loss, obscurity, and the relentless demands of endurance. Morning will come, as it always does. The streets will awaken, indifferent and bustling. The markets will resume their rhythms, and the social gaze will continue to dismiss, overlook, and judge. You will move among it all, silent, careful, unseen, performing the tasks necessary to remain alive. Identity, as it was once known, has been ceded to necessity. The self is now defined by adaptability, observation, and the capacity to endure in a world that does not see you. You find yourself startled when a fragment surfaces, a fleeting image of a family meal, a workplace routine, or a name long forgotten. But even these glimpses are fleeting, swallowed quickly by the immediacy of the present. Survival demands presence, not nostalgia, and memory is often sacrificed at the altar of endurance. Yet even in this loss, small communities of crawlers form, bonding over shared necessity and empathy. You feel the warmth of human generosity, however mediated through necessity, and it offers reassurance that the world contains pockets of kindness. In the quiet hours, as you settle into a corner to rest, you trace the edges of a blanket or the curve of a coin, allowing yourself a moment to imagine the day when survival might feel less precarious. These glimmers of hope are as much psychological sustenance as they are physical. Yet, even here, amidst scarcity and hardship, there are moments fleeting, fragile, and almost miraculous when hope pierces the monotony. You have learned to recognize these moments, to grasp them, and to allow them to sustain you until the next trial arrives. They are rare, delicate, and yet they carry more weight than the heaviest burden of hunger or cold. Some crawlers, yourself included, have learned the discipline of saving, the painstaking accumulation of small coins, in the hopes of a larger reward. Admission to a workhouse, a temporary shelter, a place where the cold cannot reach so easily, and the gnawing hunger might be abated for a time. You fold each coin carefully into a scrap of cloth, tucking it into a pocket that has been mended and patched until it is nearly threadbare. The weight of the coins is slight, yet it feels like a treasure, a lifeline, a symbol of control in a world that strips you of almost everything else. Each coin saved represents patience, cunning, and restraint, the ability to delay gratification in a reality where immediacy is often demanded by necessity. You imagine, with cautious hope, the day when the accumulation will be enough to secure admission, to rest, to reclaim even a small measure of safety and dignity. Temporary work offers similar glimmers of relief, fleeting and precarious. You find yourself at the market, sweeping stalls after vendors have gone, fetching water from communal pumps, or hauling crates of produce to places where hands accustomed to desperation can earn a few coins. The labor is grueling, physically exhausting, yet it is imbued with a sense of agency that is otherwise rare in your days. You understand that the work does not offer security. There is no contract, no guarantee, no continuity, but in the moment, it provides purpose, sustenance, and a sense of participation in the world outside the shadows. Each crate lifted, each sweep of the broom, each measured step with a bucket in hand becomes a small act of triumph against the invisibility imposed by the streets. Even the simplest acts of kindness from strangers or institutions can shine like a lantern in darkness. You remember the warmth of a donated blanket, slightly worn and patched, yet softer and more insulating than any rag or newspaper you have managed to procure. You wrap it around your shoulders, feeling the weight not only in its fibers but in its affirmation that someone, somewhere, has recognized your existence and deemed it worthy of protection, however momentarily. Used clothes, perhaps a coat too large, a pair of shoes slightly scuffed but still serviceable, provide both practical relief and a quiet assertion of humanity. These items, modest as they are, reinforce the notion that survival is possible, that care and compassion are not absent, and that the world is not wholly indifferent to the suffering that surrounds it. The process of earning, saving, and receiving these small measures of hope is both ritualistic and strategic. You have learned the timings of the market, the habits of the vendors, and the moments when temporary work is available. You observe, quietly and keenly, the routines that govern the day. When a cart is left unattended, when buckets are available for carrying water, when a stall needs sweeping, each opportunity is fleeting, and you must move with precision, balancing caution with speed, awareness with action. Even minor mistakes, a slip of the hand, a miscalculated step, or an untimely glance can nullify the reward, leaving you empty-handed and disheartened. Hope in this context is fragile, dependent not only on fortune but on your own skill, vigilance, and adaptability. The emotional weight of these moments is profound. You clutch coins, blankets, or tools with care, aware that each represents a bridge between despair and possibility. You feel the warmth of human generosity, however mediated through necessity, and it offers reassurance that the world contains pockets of kindness. In the quiet hours, as you settle into a corner to rest, you trace the edges of a blanket or the curve of a coin, allowing yourself a moment to imagine the day when survival might feel less precarious. These glimmers of hope are as much psychological sustenance as they are physical. They allow you to carry on, to endure the cold, the hunger, the relentless social scorn, and the ever-present threat of illness or injury. Interpersonal networks among crawlers amplify these glimmers of hope. You have companions who share information about temporary work, locations where blankets or clothes may be distributed, or where coins might be earned through small labor. Warnings are given softly but urgently. A constable approaching, a vendor prone to outbursts, a spot where scraps are left unattended for only a moment before being claimed. You exchange these tidbits of information with the same care you would handle food or warmth, recognizing that knowledge is survival, and that cooperation, even among those equally desperate, can yield moments of relief that would otherwise be unattainable. Each shared tip, each whispered instruction, is an investment in a collective resilience, a mutual assertion that hope, though rare, is still possible. You have also learned to capitalize on the fleeting generosity of passers-by. Coins dropped inadvertently, leftovers left unguarded, or small scraps offered to the persistent or the desperate become vital contributions to survival. The act of claiming these gifts requires discretion, timing, and confidence, a balance of courage and subtlety. You have witnessed others miscalculate, drawing attention or provoking anger, and you have seen how quickly potential relief can be converted into punishment. Yet when successful, the moment is a potent reinforcement of agency and the affirmation that the world still contains pathways, however narrow, to sustenance and security. Even in workhouses or mission halls, where conditions are regimented and charity is conditional, small victories occur. A temporary allocation of bread or soup, a chance to sit away from the wet and wind, a small space to rest. These moments provide tangible respite. You learn to measure them, to savor them, and to recognize their significance without being overwhelmed by their brevity. Each instance is a reinforcement that the city, oppressive and indifferent though it may seem, still contains threads of possibility. Survival is not merely endurance. It is also the ability to recognize, seize, and extend these threads until they offer stability, however temporary. These glimmers of hope shape behavior, thought, and emotion in subtle ways. You find yourself planning, rationing, and moving strategically, guided not only by immediate necessity but by anticipation of potential opportunities. You observe, you memorize, and you adjust. Even in moments of extreme discomfort, you retain a measure of optimism born from experience. The memory of a coin earned yesterday, a blanket received in kindness, a meal shared, a temporary respite from exposure or hunger. These memories serve as guides, reinforcing the notion that effort can yield reward, that persistence can uncover the rarest of treasures, and that human kindness, though fleeting and conditional, exists within the harshness of the streets. Nightfall brings with it both challenge and reward. You wrap yourself in layered rags and blankets, clutch coins close to your body, and reflect on the day's efforts. Temporary work, chance generosity, and shared knowledge have provided sustenance, warmth, and a measure of security. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of small victories against the ever-present threats of cold, hunger, illness, and social disdain. The hope is fragile, subject to the whims of circumstance, yet it persists. It is enough to carry you through the night, to allow a measure of rest, to sustain the fragile thread of survival until the morning brings opportunity anew. Even as exhaustion and hunger press in, these moments of relief reinforce resilience. You realize that survival is not merely a matter of endurance, but of awareness, strategy, and the capacity to recognize opportunity. You cling to the small signs, the glint of a coin, the texture of a blanket, the instructions whispered by companions, each a lifeline, each a beacon in a world otherwise defined by hardship. Hope, though rare and fleeting, provides the energy to continue, the courage to act, and the faith, however cautious, that tomorrow may offer another chance at sustenance, warmth, and even dignity. The streets grow colder as the day drifts into evening, the sky a pale gray fading into darkness. You shuffle along the cobblestones, your body aching from hunger and exposure, your hands clutching scraps of cloth and coins saved painstakingly over days. You have walked this path many times, eyes scanning for warmth, for shelter, for the faintest glimmer of reprieve from the relentless reality of the streets. And always, at the edge of your mind, there lingers the workhouse, a looming promise. A place where a roof might cover you, where a bed could shield against the frost, where a meal might finally quiet the gnawing ache in your belly. The workhouse tempts you with its apparent security, yet even in its allure, a shadow stretches long, whispering of cost, loss, and sacrifice that no warmth or food can fully mitigate. The sign hangs above the entrance, painted with authority, and a promise that feels both irresistible and perilous. You pause, heart pounding, considering the decision. To step inside is to surrender everything that remains. Freedom, the bonds you have struggled to maintain, and the fragile dignity that you still cling to despite the cold, the hunger, and the social scorn. You recall those who came before, their faces etched with regret, eyes hollowed by experience, hands folded tightly as though holding on to the memory of autonomy now gone. The workhouse does not merely provide shelter, it demands a complete surrender, a submission to a system that sees individuals not as people with histories, families, or emotions, but as labor units to be molded, disciplined, and contained. The choice is agonizing: to remain exposed, vulnerable, and free, or to enter a space that offers food, warmth, and rest at the cost of everything else. Families are separated without warning. You have seen it with your own eyes. Parents led down separate corridors, children directed to unfamiliar rooms, all instruction given with a cold efficiency that leaves no room for question or protest. The cries of those torn from one another echo through the halls, blending with the clang of metal doors and the footsteps of overseers. You imagine what it would be like to be pulled from someone you love, someone whose presence offers the only comfort in a harsh world. The thought chills you more than the wind ever could, yet you know that hunger, exhaustion, and exposure will not wait for sentiment. The workhouse offers food, warmth, and a bed, but it exacts a toll far greater than the temporary relief it promises: the fracturing of human bonds, the erasure of familial identity, the transformation of individuals into faceless laborers. Labor is relentless. You have observed the tasks assigned within the workhouse: scrubbing floors, hauling water, tending to communal kitchens, performing chores that demand endurance beyond reason. The work is not only grueling but continuous, leaving little time for rest, reflection, or the small comforts that sustain you on the streets. Hands once capable of delicate skill or gentle care are repurposed for repetitive, exhausting labor. Backs ache, fingers blister, and bodies, already weakened by hunger and exposure, are pushed beyond the limits of endurance. The promise of shelter is overshadowed by the toll exacted, the slow erosion of strength and spirit that accompanies the daily demands. You weigh the value of warmth against the cost of bodily punishment, of fatigue, of the surrender of control over your own life. The rules are absolute, enforced with precision and often cruelty. Movement is monitored, speech is constrained, and any hint of dissent or hesitation is met with reprimand or punishment. You observe the faces of those inside, noting the rigidity of posture, the downward gaze, the small gestures of obedience performed with mechanical regularity. Individuals who entered with hope or defiance are quickly reshaped into figures of compliance, their personalities subdued, their autonomy suppressed. The workhouse does not merely shelter, it disciplines. It molds the human spirit into forms that serve the institution, leaving little space for individuality, creativity, or rebellion. You feel the weight of this knowledge pressing on you, a warning that the comfort offered is inseparable from control, that warmth is inseparable from obedience. Still, the temptation is strong. Hunger bites, cold seeps through your rags, and exhaustion erodes resolve. The streets offer no guarantees, only relentless exposure, uncertainty, and the constant negotiation for scraps, warmth, and ephemeral kindness. The workhouse stands as a paradoxical beacon, a place where survival seems possible, yet freedom, family, and dignity must be surrendered. You weigh the possibilities, measuring the immediate relief against the intangible costs that stretch into years. The decision is not abstract. It presses upon your body as surely as frost, hunger, or the gaze of those who would dismiss you entirely. To enter is to choose survival, in exchange for the erasure of self, a transaction that every crawler must contemplate in the quiet moments of desperation. Observing others who have entered offers both warns and provides insight. Some emerge temporarily restored, carrying the warmth of food and the reprieve from cold and hunger. Yet the expression in their eyes betrays a deeper cost: subdued individuality, muted voices, the faint but pervasive weight of separation from loved ones, and the autonomy of street life. You notice the cautious avoidance of eye contact, the mechanical efficiency of movement, and the absence of spontaneous laughter or gestures of personal choice. The workhouse reshapes not only the body but the very essence of identity, converting the vibrant, adaptive behaviors of street life into a regimented, controlled existence. The glimmer of comfort is inseparable from the shadow of conformity. For those who resist entry, the struggle continues unabated. Hunger gnaws, cold persists, and exposure threatens daily. You navigate these streets with heightened awareness, searching for scraps, warmth, and fleeting moments of kindness. The risk of injury, theft, or sickness is ever present, and the constant negotiation for survival becomes a discipline in itself. The workhouse, in contrast, offers certainty, but certainty at the price of selfhood, family bonds, and dignity. You understand, perhaps better than anyone, the paradox. The streets are harsh, yet they preserve a measure of freedom and autonomy. The workhouse offers respite, yet demands surrender of the very elements that define human life and individuality. Even small decisions become moral and strategic calculations. You watch others, observing when to push for temporary aid, when to retreat, when to save a coin for admission, and when to remain on the streets. Each choice is informed by the lessons of prior hardship, by observation of the experiences of those who entered the workhouse before you, by a deep, intuitive sense of risk and reward. Survival requires both courage and caution, for miscalculations carry immediate consequences. Hunger can be temporarily sated in the workhouse, but loss of identity, autonomy, and family is permanent, leaving scars that endure beyond the temporary comfort of warmth or a meal. The psychological toll is pervasive. The streets erode confidence, self-respect, and emotional resilience, yet they preserve agency. The workhouse restores basic survival needs, but imposes a different set of constraints, psychological and social, that shape thought, behavior, and emotional expression. You contemplate the nature of hope, weighing the immediate relief of warmth and food against the slow, imperceptible cost of submission. The paradox is a constant companion, coloring every thought, influencing every decision, shaping the way you move, speak, and interact with the world. Even small moments of agency on the streets are precious, because they affirm selfhood in ways the workhouse cannot. Families are the most vulnerable in this equation. You witness children led down separate corridors from parents, siblings divided into different quarters, the enforced separation justified as efficient management. The sound of a child's cry, muffled but persistent, echoes in the hallways, blending with the mechanical rhythm of labor and the footsteps of overseers. You imagine the fear, confusion, and despair of those torn from familiar faces, the slow erosion of trust and emotional stability. The workhouse's promise of food and shelter comes at the cost of these fundamental human connections, and you understand the stakes of the choice viscerally: warmth and sustenance, or the preservation of familial bonds and emotional continuity. You also witness fleeting acts of kindness and resistance within the institution. A fellow crawler offering a piece of bread to a younger child, a whispered word of encouragement, a shared glance that conveys solidarity. These moments, though rare, remind you that even in environments designed to erase individuality and enforce conformity, human empathy persists. The resilience of these small acts underscores the paradox of the workhouse. While it strips away freedom and dignity, it cannot completely extinguish the subtle bonds and quiet defiance that human beings cultivate to survive psychologically and emotionally. You cling to these observations as evidence that hope, though constrained, endures. At night, when the city quiets, you curl into your corner on the streets, clutching the remnants of rags, scraps, and any coins saved. The distant glow of the workhouse windows hints at warmth, light, and structured relief. You weigh the temptation, feeling the gnawing hunger, the sting of cold, and the ache of exposure. Your body craves the security it promises. Your mind hesitates, cognizant of the costs. Freedom, family, dignity, the faint but vital sense of selfhood that has sustained you through nights of cold, hunger, and judgment. The decision is not abstract, it presses on you physically, emotionally, and morally. To enter is to surrender, to comply, to be reshaped. To remain is to endure, to persist, to claim agency at the risk of life and health. Morning will come, as it always does. You will navigate the streets, scavenging, rationing, observing, enduring. The workhouse will remain, both a promise and a threat, a beacon and a prison. You carry its shadow in every movement, every glance, every calculated choice. The temptation is persistent because survival is relentless. After all, hunger and cold do not pause for moral deliberation, and because the body often demands relief that only the institution can provide. Yet the streets, harsh as they are, remind you of your agency, your autonomy, and the delicate, essential human bonds that persist even in the most trying circumstances. The workhouse is a temptation that tests both body and spirit, a measure of endurance, choice, and the persistent struggle between survival and selfhood. The morning mist hangs heavy over the streets, dampening sounds and softening the outlines of buildings that loom like silent sentinels. You move carefully through the narrow alleyways, stepping over puddles and debris, the chill seeping into your thin clothes. Hunger has not yet fully claimed you, but the gnawing emptiness in your stomach is a constant companion, as relentless as the frost that bites at your fingers and toes. Among the many burdens you carry in this precarious world, one weighs more heavily than all others: the children. Their presence sharpens every fear, magnifies every risk, and presses upon your chest like a stone. To survive for yourself is one matter. To protect them is an endless, exhausting struggle against forces beyond your control. Authorities patrol the streets with practiced indifference, eyes scanning for signs of disorder, hunger, or impropriety. But you know better. Their gaze is drawn not merely to behavior, but to potential. Children are considered the most vulnerable, and among crawlers, they are also the most precious. You have seen the glances of constables as they pass a young child clinging to a parent's hand, their eyes calculating, their expressions unreadable. One wrong look, one misstep, and a child can be taken, dragged away to an orphanage or institution, leaving the parent in despair and the family forever altered. You instinctively shield the small bodies, bending low, moving swiftly, and whispering hurried instructions to ensure they remain unseen. Every movement is a negotiation with risk, every breath a reminder of the fragility of their safety. Families cling to each other desperately, knowing that separation can be permanent. You have observed parents folding children into ragged coats, pulling them close against the night wind, whispering reassurances even as their own exhaustion threatens to unravel their strength. The streets are cold, and the eyes of passers-by are often indifferent or hostile. Yet the true danger comes from those with power: the constables who patrol, the inspectors who judge, the bureaucrats who decide the fate of a child with little concern for familial bonds. The tension is constant, a low hum beneath every step you take. You move through it as if wading through invisible currents, aware that any slip could shatter the fragile cocoon you have created around your loved ones. The orphanages to which children are taken offer shelter, but at a cost. You have heard their stories, fragments whispered in dark corners, the long days of monotonous labor, the rigid schedules that leave no room for play or warmth, the authority figures who enforce rules with harsh discipline. Meals are regular, yes, but meager. Beds are provided, yet stripped of any comfort beyond what is necessary. Names are replaced with numbers or designations, identities erased in favor of efficiency and control. You imagine the small bodies, frightened and bewildered, pressed into unfamiliar routines, their tiny hands grasping at air that cannot hold the warmth of home. Each story you hear is a reminder of what is at stake: the loss of connection, the erosion of trust, the psychological toll that accompanies physical survival. Even in the moment of danger, families improvise. You have seen parents create signals, gestures that communicate urgency, routes of retreat, hiding places known only to those who share blood and love. A whispered warning, a small hand tugged toward shelter, a quick diversion to draw attention away from the child. These actions are instinctive, rehearsed through necessity, yet fragile and vulnerable to misfortune. The weight of vigilance never lifts, sleep comes sparingly, and even rest is punctuated by the anxiety that the first step outside might bring the intervention of those with authority. You learn quickly that hope is provisional, and that each day survived intact is a temporary victory over forces that seek to fragment family and community. Children themselves adapt, in ways both remarkable and heartbreaking. You watch them move with quiet caution, learn to anticipate dangers, and internalize rules that they cannot fully understand. They mimic the strategies of their elders, staying close, remaining silent, observing the behaviors that avoid confrontation. Yet you see traces of innocence that persist: the small smiles shared in fleeting moments, the curiosity that cannot be entirely suppressed, the spontaneous laughter that erupts when danger is momentarily absent. You see the tension in their shoulders, the lines etched across faces too young for so many worries, the hollowing of eyes from nights spent in vigilance. Every interaction with a constable, every encounter with a stranger, every noise in the alley brings the potential for loss. Parents measure their own strength against the needs of their children, making impossible calculations: how far to walk, when to risk scavenging for food, which alley offers shelter without exposure. The stakes are unceasing, and the consequences irreversible. Children also bear witness to the wider cruelty of society. Passing faces glance without recognition, merchants shoo away the small bodies without hesitation, and the cold glare of wealth reminds them of their place in the hierarchy. Even newspapers describe their existence in dismissive terms, reinforcing the societal notion that the children of crawlers are expendable. You have witnessed moments when temporary shelter is granted without incident, when food is shared generously, when other adults watch the children for a brief period, allowing parents to gather sustenance or rest. Each such occurrence is treasured, not for its magnitude, but for its affirmation of humanity. The recognition that children, even those born into hardship, deserve protection and care. These moments are brief, easily disrupted, yet they sustain families as much as any meal or blanket, providing a psychological and emotional anchor that reinforces the fragile bonds of family. At night, when the streets fall silent, the vigilance does not abate. Parents curl themselves around their children, improvising warmth from scraps of clothing, layers of newspaper, or the bodies of fellow crawlers pressed together for shared protection. Each movement, each adjustment of a ragged blanket, each whispered word carries weight. The children cling instinctively, sensing the urgency and the care, finding in these small gestures a semblance of safety and reassurance. The night is long, the cold unrelenting. Yet these bonds tenuous, improvisational, and fragile allow survival. They are a testament to human resilience, to the capacity for love and protection even in environments engineered to strip both away. The threat of separation looms constantly. You have seen the momentary panic in a child's eyes when a constable approaches, the tension in a parent's shoulders as they make a split-second decision to hide or flee. Even the smallest distraction, a fallen scrap of bread, the shuffle of a passerby, a misstep on slick cobblestones can provoke intervention, leading to separation that is often permanent. Families navigate these risks instinctively, coordinating movements, sharing responsibilities, and reinforcing the fragile trust between adult and child. Each successful day of unity reinforces the sense of control, however limited, and offers a small victory against the unyielding pressures of the streets. The cycle is relentless, and the lessons are learned young. Children develop acute awareness, an understanding of threat and avoidance that belies their age. They internalize signals, gestures, and routines designed to minimize exposure, to protect themselves and their parents. You watch as small hands clutch scrap cloth tightly, as eyes dart to detect approaching feet or shadows, as bodies shift instinctively to maintain warmth and concealment. The education is harsh, unrelenting, yet effective, a testament to adaptation and resilience under conditions that would break less hardened spirits. Even brief encounters with kindness are magnified in significance. A passerby offering a scrap of food, a kind word, or a momentary distraction from exposure can restore morale, affirm dignity, and reinforce hope. These interactions, though rare, are enough to sustain a family through the next hours, the next risks, the next cold night. You understand that survival is not measured solely in calories or warmth, but in the capacity to recognize, seize, and nurture these ephemeral moments. Each small act becomes a lifeline, a thread connecting child to parent, parent to child, and both to the tenuous, unrelenting web of existence on the streets. By dawn, as the city stirs once more, you clutch your children close, moving cautiously through alleys and streets, acutely aware of both opportunity and danger. Each step, each glance, each breath is guided by the knowledge that the day ahead will test endurance, vigilance, and the fragility of your bonds. You weigh risks, when to seek food, when to rest, when to hide. The cycle of survival is continuous, unyielding, and shaped by forces far beyond personal control. Yet even within this harsh reality, the family persists, finding strength in each other, protection in shared vigilance, and fleeting comfort in the rare acts of kindness that punctuate an otherwise relentless struggle. Even as exhaustion seeps into your bones, you take solace in the resilience of your children. Their small hands gripping yours, their eyes alert and alive, their bodies nestled against yours for warmth and security. These moments of connection reinforce your determination to endure, to protect, and to navigate a world that offers little beyond danger and deprivation. Each day survived intact, each night passed without intervention, becomes a testament to your ingenuity, vigilance, and unyielding devotion. In these fleeting victories, however minor, hope endures, threaded through the relentless cycle of survival and anchored in the fragile but essential bonds between parent and child. The streets are empty, yet full of menace. You walk slowly, your body stiff, your senses alert, every shadow and distant sound carrying potential danger. The air is thin, bitter, and relentless, seeping through the layers of rags that barely protect you. Hunger claws at your stomach, a constant reminder that survival is a full-time occupation, that nothing is guaranteed beyond the next hour. You glance at your hands, stiff and cold, and wonder if you could endure even a single night under the conditions these people faced. Modern life has not prepared you for this. Your muscles, your immune system, your very endurance have been cultivated in comfort, in routine, in a world where food is certain and nights are warm. Here, all of that is stripped away. You shiver, imagining the nights you would spend pressed against stone steps, shivering until numbness dulls both pain and thought. Starvation is not just a physical condition, it is a mental siege. You can feel its effects even in your imagination, the slow, gnawing hollow that twists the stomach, the trembling hands, the head buzzing faintly from a lack of nourishment. Hunger in this world is relentless. There are no predictable meals, no safe places to store food, no warm kitchen to prepare a modest dinner. Every day is a negotiation with emptiness. Every step a calculation of energy expended versus food acquired. You have known hunger in brief intervals, perhaps a skipped breakfast or a late dinner, and yet the intensity of enduring days, weeks, perhaps months of constant deprivation is almost unimaginable. The body weakens. The mind sharpens in some ways and dulls in others, and you wonder if even the strongest modern body could withstand the unbroken pressure of necessity. Disease compounds every hardship. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, scurvy, dysentery all stalk the streets like invisible predators. You feel the cold damp pressing into your lungs and imagine the ease with which a simple chill could become infection. An infection could become death. Skin sores, lice, minor cuts, and bruises that you would dismiss in a modern clinic can become gateways to systemic illness here. You picture yourself bleeding from a scraped ankle, fever climbing unchecked, surrounded by others equally vulnerable, with no medicine, no doctor, and no reprieve. Each cough echoing in the alleys carries menace. You realize that modern immunity, conditioned through decades of nutrition, vaccination, and medical intervention, would falter. The human body is resilient, but not against the constant, multifaceted assaults of a life spent navigating hunger, exposure, and disease simultaneously. The cold itself is an unrelenting enemy. Even with multiple layers, modern humans are not accustomed to the deep chill that penetrates bone and marrow. You imagine nights spent curled against stone steps, breathing clouds of freezing air, fingers and toes going numb despite every effort to preserve warmth. Sleep is precarious, fragmented, a dangerous indulgence that could result in frostbite or death. Even indoors, in crowded shelters with stone floors and barely there fire, temperatures drop to near freezing. Every movement becomes a compromise, every attempt to wrest a negotiation with the body's diminishing resources. You can feel, in your imagination, the gradual dulling of extremities, the creeping sense of exhaustion, the ever-present fear that a single lapse could end everything. But survival is not merely a physical challenge. The continuous fear of death, theft, police, and hunger is a siege on the mind. You would learn quickly that nothing is safe, nothing predictable. Every corner may conceal danger, every hand extended may hide threat. Every sound could signal loss. The mental load is crushing. Decisions are constant and urgent: where to sleep, where to scavenge, how to avoid attention, how to ration energy. You imagine the anxiety, the hypervigilance, the unending calculation required just to persist for a day. Nights bring not only cold but the terror of violence, of rats, of the unseen, of authority figures ready to punish without mercy. You picture yourself flinching at every step, eyes scanning for threats, muscles tensed against hypothetical attacks. The mind cannot rest. Sleep is never fully restorative because alertness is survival. The unbroken pressure would erode rational thought, fracture focus, and eventually undermine the will to continue. Emotionally, the landscape is equally harsh. Loneliness, social invisibility, and constant judgment weigh as heavily as hunger or cold. You imagine walking among crowds, invisible, dismissed, treated with disdain or avoidance. You call out, yet your voice is met with indifference or derision. Newspapers describe your existence with contempt. Shopkeepers glare or shoo you away, and wealthy citizens step around you as if you were a stain on the pavement. The isolation penetrates deeper than the cold. Humans are social creatures, and being rendered unseen, unacknowledged, and unrecognized would erode confidence, hope, and emotional resilience in days, not months. You feel the gnawing loneliness as a tangible presence, pressing against your chest, hollowing out motivation, and leaving a pervasive sense of despair that no temporary comfort can dispel. Even relationships within the crawling community are fraught and fragile. Bonds form out of necessity, but scarcity, stress, and constant threat make trust tenuous. You imagine the calculations required to share scraps of food, warmth, or information. Who is reliable? Who might betray? Who has more urgent needs? Every interaction carries weight. A misjudgment could leave you exposed to theft, violence, or neglect. In the modern world, relationships are often emotional supports. Here, they are strategic survival tools, and the mental toll of constant negotiation would be relentless. You picture yourself, over days of exposure, calculating continuously, weighing decisions with extreme caution, never fully resting, never fully safe. The cumulative effect of hunger, disease, cold, and social invisibility is profound. You imagine the gradual erosion of strength, the dulling of thought, the creeping sense of despair. Even the simplest tasks, walking, scavenging, securing warmth, become monumental in the context of constant vigilance and deprivation. Modern bodies, conditioned for comfort, nutrition, and relative safety, would falter quickly under this unremitting pressure. Your muscles would weaken, your mind would fray, your emotional endurance would collapse under the unrelenting siege. You would not last a week without serious injury, illness, or mental collapse. The rhythm of survival is unrelenting, and it allows no pause, no rest, no reprieve. You imagine the most difficult moments. A night spent shivering on stone steps, stomach twisting with hunger, coughing from exposure, while shadows move around you unpredictably. A hand reaches to take your scraps. A shout startles you. A distant shout signals authority. You press closer to the wall, curling into yourself, counting coins, rationing warmth, whispering to companions if any are nearby. You would measure every breath, every movement, every heartbeat for risk and reward. This is life as it was lived then, and you feel its weight pressing against your chest even in imagination. It is not hypothetical. It is a visceral, embodied understanding of what endurance truly demands. Even small comforts, tea, scraps of food, blankets, temporary companionship offer only momentary reprieve. They do not erase the constant threats, nor do they fully sustain body or mind. Each moment of warmth is a reminder of its impermanence. Each small portion of food, a measure of its scarcity. You imagine the frustration, the relentless effort required to maintain even minimal standards of survival, and you understand that the physical and psychological load is immense. Your modern body, used to comfort, would break under these conditions. Hunger, cold, exposure, illness, social scorn, and emotional isolation form a lattice of pressure that leaves no space for error, no margin for rest, no opportunity for ease. In the end, survival is a combination of skill, experience, and sheer luck. You picture yourself trying to navigate the streets for a day, then a week, then a month. You would learn quickly that every decision has consequences. Choosing where to sleep, when to scavenge, how to ration meager sustenance, when to trust a companion, when to remain silent. Modern instincts, used to structured schedules, predictable nourishment, and medical support would be insufficient. Your body and mind are not trained for constant vigilance against such multi-layered threats. Exhaustion would set in within hours, injuries would go untreated, illness would spread unchecked, and despair would erode the will to endure. By the time night falls again, you imagine curling yourself into the corner of an alley, shivering, stomach gnawing, mind racing, ears alert to every sound, every footstep, every potential danger. Even this momentary rest is laced with anxiety. The awareness that a wrong sound, a miscalculated step, or an unexpected patrol could end survival in an instant. Emotionally, you feel the strain of constant vigilance, the pressure of loneliness, the gnawing invisibility that isolates you from recognition or aid. You understand that modern humans, conditioned for comfort, social support, and the expectation of stability, would fracture under such relentless conditions. In this life, every day is a negotiation with the environment, with society, and with one's own physical and emotional limits. Hunger, disease, cold, social scorn, loneliness. All operate simultaneously, and there is no pause, no respite, no safety net beyond ingenuity and luck. You imagine enduring days in succession, weeks in succession, and the cumulative toll is crushing. Mental resilience frays, emotional endurance falters, physical strength diminishes, and modern experience would prove wholly inadequate. You see now why survival required more than mere courage. It demanded a body and mind trained in endurance, a constant adaptation to adversity, and the capacity to persist even when every factor conspires against you. You fold into yourself for warmth, clutching scraps of cloth, counting coins, and rationing the minimal sustenance gathered through scavenging. The night presses down, heavy and unyielding, and you feel the reality of what it would mean to live this life fully. Hunger, exposure, disease, and isolation would overwhelm a modern body in days, not months. Your mind would fracture under the unending vigilance, your emotional state crushed by invisibility and social scorn, and even the instinct to endure would be tested to its limits. The stark reality is undeniable. You would not survive their life. The night settles over the streets like a thick, suffocating blanket, and you pause for a moment to observe the world the crawlers inhabit. The fog curls through alleyways and twists around the corners of buildings, softening the hard edges of the city, yet never diminishing the sharpness of the threats that lie within. You watch as figures huddle together on cold stone steps, bodies pressed close for warmth, eyes heavy with exhaustion, faces pale in the dim light. There is no fanfare here, no recognition, no applause for endurance. Their survival is quiet, almost invisible, yet every movement, every careful breath, every minute of vigilance tells the story of a struggle that is relentless and unforgiving. You feel the weight of the night, the heaviness of the cold, and you understand that survival itself is the most extraordinary feat of all. Each night is a battle, a contest waged against the unyielding forces of hunger, cold, disease, and despair. You imagine the gnawing ache of empty stomachs, the chill that penetrates even the thickest layers of cloth, the silent fear of theft or authority sweeping through the streets. Every motion is measured, every sound calculated, every step taken with precision to avoid misfortune. The crawlers navigate this harsh reality with a combination of instinct, learned skill, and relentless courage. It is not bravery in the romantic sense, nor a deliberate act of heroism. It is necessity, raw and uncompromising, shaping every aspect of their existence. You realize that strength alone would not suffice. The sharpness of mind, the awareness of danger, and the willingness to endure unbearable discomfort are equally vital. And yet, in the midst of suffering, there is a quiet resilience that astonishes you. Despite exhaustion, cold, and deprivation, the crawlers persist. They share scraps of food, blankets, and whispered warnings. They form fragile networks of trust and support, improvising survival in a world designed to render them invisible. Their endurance is not celebrated by the city, ignored by those with comfort and wealth, yet it is extraordinary. You feel the weight of this realization pressing upon you. The human capacity for adaptation and survival stretches further than you had ever imagined, reaching into depths that modern experience scarcely touches. In the silent acknowledgement of their perseverance, you sense something profound. That resilience, even when unseen, carries its own dignity. The fog thickens once more, curling over the steps and weaving between the huddled forms. Bodies settle into restless sleep, shifting occasionally against the cold stone. Limbs stiff, breaths uneven, hearts beating in synchrony with the rhythm of the night. You watch them, feeling the quiet gravity of their existence, the delicate tension between vulnerability and endurance. Each sleeper carries stories untold, memories faded, hopes deferred, and yet the simple act of surviving another night marks them as extraordinary. Their lives are threaded with suffering, but also with ingenuity, empathy, and an unspoken fortitude that transcends circumstance. You feel a solemn reverence for the quiet persistence etched into each movement, each breath, each pause of sleep that lasts just long enough to renew them for another night. As the mist swirls around the steps, the city beyond continues unaware. Life moves forward for those with comfort, security, and recognition. Yet in the shadows, the crawlers endure. Their story, whispered through the fog and carried on the cold night air, becomes a soft echo, a testament to human endurance lived at the sharpest edge. You take in the scene, silent and reflective, and feel the truth settle within you. These lives, unseen yet unforgettable, embody a resilience that is extraordinary, fragile, and profoundly human. The night holds them, and in this quiet, you understand the depth, the tragedy, and the courage of existence lived perpetually on the margins. The fog absorbs their presence, softening it, but does not erase it. It lingers as an echo of lives lived quietly in the shadows, invisible to most, yet unforgettable to anyone who pauses long enough to witness.